Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's update to the Select Board, Finance Committee, School Committee, and Capital Improvement Planning Committee on the North Reading fiscal year 2025 and beyond budget projection. My name is Michael Gilberto, Town Administrator here in the town of North Reading. Just a little bit about tonight's meeting. There is actually a series of public meetings that are occurring right now between the Select Board, School Committee, Finance Committee, and Capital Improvement Planning Committee, and they will be receiving updates on the budget. They're, at this time, asked to call their respective meetings to order, so I'll ask Mrs. Gonzalez for the Select Board to convene the Select Board meeting.
Okay, we'll open the Select Board meeting at 7:05.
And then I will ask Mr. Buckley on behalf of the School Committee.
I call the school committee meeting to order at 7:05.
And I'll ask Mrs. Hurlbut on behalf of the Finance Committee.
Call the Finance Committee to order at 7:06.
And to Mr. Kelleher on behalf of the Capital Improvement Planning Committee.
I call the Capital Improvement Planning Committee to order at 7:06.
Thank you. The members of the committees are asked to jot down any questions that they may have as we go through the presentation. In the upper right-hand corner, it's not a huge digit, but there are numbers on the slide, so if you have a question on a particular slide, if you just want to jot down the number, that will be hopefully helpful. Once the slides have been concluded, we'll certainly take questions, and then there will be an opportunity for discussion. Once all of the elected and appointed officials have asked their questions and finished discussion, if time allows, members of the public may be able to ask questions. If that's not the case, because the hour is late or because of the volume of questions, there are already information sessions that are scheduled for the public to ask questions on April 24th at 8 p.m. and via webinar on May 9th at 7:30 p.m. Sorry, April 24th via webinar at 8 p.m. and May 9th at 7:30 p.m. in person. And I think most folks in the room are aware, but for those who are not, there's pretty extensive information on the fiscal year 2025 budget available on the town's website at www.northreadingma.gov, and that's been updated to include information from the school department as well. For the benefit of those in the audience and at home, seated in the front row facing the team, facing the audience are members of the town's financial planning team, which is not a public body, but is a collaboration of the Select Board, the Finance Committee, and the School Committee, as well as school and municipal administration. Seated in the front row of the audience are the remaining members of the Select Board, Finance Committee, School Committee, and the Capital Improvement Planning Committee. So thank you all for joining us to hear this presentation. As I mentioned earlier, the committees have all posted joint public meetings for this evening in accordance with the state open meeting law. So I'll start just with a series of a few definitions that may be important as we go through tonight's conversation. First, free cash, which we've talked about in a series of town meetings recently. It's not free money. It's a state finance term for what they call the undesignated fund balance at the end of a previous year, and it's certified by the State Department of Revenue. To put it more simply, it's money that's left over from the previous year's town budget carried forth into a future fiscal year. Proposition 2.5, many of us are familiar with the term, others may not be. It's a state law that limits how much a city or town can increase property taxes per fiscal year. The increase in property taxes on all properties in town combined cannot be more than 2.5% per year. Individual properties will vary based upon market factors, including sales in your neighborhood or sales of a similar type home, which may increase that number further or decrease it lower depending upon the property. Our tax rate, as most folks know, is per $1,000 of valuation, and it's directly associated with the value of your property, your home and the land. If overall values go up, the rate will come down townwide, and vice versa. If the values go down, the rate may go up. But the impact as a whole cannot exceed 2.5% without a specific ballot vote of the town, which will come to discussion later on. An override, which is a common term for a tax increase above that amount, is just that, a tax increase in the amount of property tax revenue that may be raised above the 2.5% limit I referenced earlier. An increase in the form of an override remains in place each future year. So when it's voted, it's not in one fiscal year and then it goes away. It stays in place, and it itself grows by the 2.5% number I described earlier in the presentation each fiscal year. a debt exclusion. It's a vote to increase property taxes above that 2.5% limit for the period of time that the town is repaying a bond or loan for a project. And probably the example that I can best give is the building that we're sitting in right here, our middle high school construction project, which was funded by a debt exclusion. So that was a vote at town meeting, it was a vote at the ballot, and there was also a state grant that was involved for this particular project. And then new growth, which we talk about occasionally when we talk about tax revenue. It's the additional tax revenue generated by new construction, renovations, and other increases in the property tax base during a calendar year. This is in addition to the 2.5% growth on existing buildings and properties. A couple of terms that are sort of unique to our North Reading budget process. Fixed costs for the town of North Reading's purposes include the state assessments that we are required to pay the state for certain services, county retirement system assessment, which we're required to pay Middlesex County Retirement, health insurance, which sort of bleeds a little bit into school and municipal operating costs because it's directly related to the number and nature of employees that we have, regional, vocational, technical, and agricultural school assessments, and debt service or our loan repayments. Those are all fixed costs for purposes of this discussion. Municipal costs are salaries and expenses for municipal departments such as police, fire, DPW. School costs, similar salaries and expenses for North Reading Public Schools. And the town budget is sort of the whole thing wrapped up. Fixed costs, municipal costs, and school costs. We also have 3 enterprises, the water enterprise, our Hillview enterprise, and Parks and Recreation. Those are largely funded by user fees, and for purposes of this discussion, are not necessarily directly part of it. Just a note, as the conversation takes place this evening and into future weeks, and even to reflect what has been discussed in previous meetings, the budgets are constantly evolving, and there are many revenue and expense components for the town's budget. Some of those components are known in advance, some of them become known at different points in time leading up to our June town meeting, and some are not known until policy decisions made by the select board and the school committee, for example, have been made. You may note that there's a slight variance on some figures during tonight's discussion, and just a reflection of the fact that it is an evolving process as we build the budget. And just another note on budgets. We're talking about proposals. It's the attendees at town meeting that have the final say. All of the work done in advance of town meeting is intended to provide voters a plan that they may choose to approve or disapprove, or for that matter, amend. However, a budget must be in place by July 1st each year for the town's departments to operate, including the public schools. So the next series of slides, for those of you who were here on Monday night, relate to the school department's budget. So this reflects what's been proposed by the superintendent and the assistant superintendent and is under review by the school committee. And I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Michael Conley, who's here this evening to speak to the school budget.
Thank you, Mr. Gilberto. Great. So, thank you. So the school department has really over the last several weeks gone through a few presentations to date where we've tried to kind of educate the school committee and various stakeholders of the various funding challenges and priorities that are reflected in a few versions of the school budget. So we've done some webinars, we've done some preliminary presentations, we had a detailed public hearing on Monday evening. So in the next few slides, I'm going to try to attempt to kind of talk about the highlights and sort of big picture items of what is reflected in the school budget that we're recommending to the school committee, and they're still under deliberations and discussion and gathering information at this point from administration and all stakeholders. And then just talk about some of the big drivers that are in a lot of ways driving what some of these line items higher than what has been typical in over previous years. So these are the school budget proposals that we feel are sort of on discussion, kind of on the table, that we've been deliberating with the school committee and with administration and receiving feedback on. So the first column here reflects what would represent a balanced budget, and that would be a budget between our salary proposal and our expense proposal that would be reflected of the available revenues that are currently. And as Mr. Gilberto, town administrator, mentioned, it's still a very fluid process, but certainly with our best available revenue numbers that we have to date, that the finance planning team has been reviewing on a weekly basis for a number of weeks, The first column would represent what would be a balanced budget that is within the available revenue. And that is a budget that is 3.9% higher than our current fiscal year 2024 budget. So there is obviously, if we were to move forward with that balanced budget at this point, there would be several reductions to services, both with staffing, current staffing, as well as with expenses and within the school department budget. And on Monday evening, if anyone tuned in, you heard a lot from our school principals, our directors, our budget leaders, some school committee members of the community that was there that asked questions that talked a little bit about what those impacts to those services would be. And I'm going to try to highlight those with Dr. Daly's assistance over the next few minutes, so everyone kind of understands what's kind of at risk in a sense. So we're going to go over those in a moment. The second column was when we put together a school department budget, we always try to start from what we refer to as level services. And what that means is we try to look at, try to maintain the same level of services that we all are experiencing in the North Reading school system today. But we all know nothing gets cheaper. You know, there's everything kind of gets a little more expensive from year to year. Expenses go up. And, you know, there's inflationary increases, there's cost of living adjustments for our employees and employee unions. There's other rate increases for the various operational costs that we have to run the school system, with transportation, with utilities, with our maintenance contracts. And we would make those adjustments to maintain those contractual obligations, both from a salary standpoint and an expense standpoint, to maintain the same level of services. We also look at enrollment, and enrollment really does drive our staffing budget. So we have class size guidelines that we try to follow to really be able to deliver our educational services at an optimum level at every level, elementary and secondary level. So there are enrollment changes that happen amongst these levels, and the need for that staffing is always kind of changing. So we're able to look at prior year data and predict enrollment pretty accurately from year to year, especially in the short term, the first 1, 2, 3 years out. So the enrollment at the elementary level, when we look at the middle column, the level services, is increasing next year. So we have had to make increases, in particularly in our what we would refer to as our primary grades, the kindergarten level, first grade level, second grade level, to address that increase in enrollment, to be able to maintain the class sizes that we are currently have in North Reading and within what we would refer to as our guidelines for optimum learning. So that is level services is everything we have today, plus some minor increases. As you can see, we did recommend 2.4 FTE increases, and that's particularly at the elementary level, because that's where we're seeing the influx of students. And we always are looking at where we can reallocate some existing staff if there are changes at higher levels. But when we looked at it to maintain that services and those class sizes and what we're delivering in terms of our specialized programs, access to specialist and elective courses, that's the increase that was necessary. So that is also reflected in the middle column. So the middle column, level services, when we look at our salaries and our expenses, was 7.1% higher than our current spending level in fiscal year 2024. Now, the reality is 7.1% is higher than what we've experienced in terms of when we put together a level services budget over the last number of years. If you were to look at the average over the last decade, we're probably at somewhere between 3.5% and 4%. And there are kind of key drivers and key reasons why we're almost double that this year when we try to look at level services that I just kind of want to highlight for everyone's kind of understanding. So certainly, first and foremost, we obviously have to meet our contractual salary obligations to our staff. We have been negotiating with the teachers this year and the NREA, the Education Association. We've had to, so there's been a need to make what we would refer to as necessary and appropriate adjustments to those cost of living adjustments for staff to maintain the high quality staff and student teacher ratios that we've all come to enjoy here in North Reading. And those, in some cases, we've had, so that's certainly a big driver that within what's being reflected in level services and 7.1%. As I just mentioned, we've had to add staff because of the enrollment increases at the elementary level, so that certainly, we don't always have to do that. We haven't had to do that at this level over the last number of years, but next we're seeing kind of the enrollment start to increase, and especially at the elementary level, so we've had to make that adjustment for next year as well. We're also seeing higher than typical operational cost increases, and that's just, we want to maintain our 5 schools, our 4 campuses as well. We want to have preventative maintenance contracts in place. We've seen higher utility costs. We've seen higher increases operationally for things like HVAC maintenance and boiler maintenance and wastewater treatment plant operations. So these contracts, nothing gets cheaper. And the reality is, with inflation's been what it's been over the last number of years, and supply shortages and everything that the challenges that have existed in these various industries and markets, where that cost is passed back on to us. So to maintain those same level of services and contracts, we've had to make those adjustments. So we've seen high rate increases higher than normal. What was typically a 2 or 3% annual rate increases is double that. So to have those contracts to come in, maintain our facilities, maintain our heating and cooling equipment, we've had to make those adjustments. That's the same for utilities. Our busing contract, we bus over 50%, well over of the students to school each and every day. And that contract next year, because of the challenges in that industry, with supply shortages of bus drivers, of qualified bus drivers, with the fuel escalations that being what it's been, that contract is going up double than what we've seen it. Those rates are 8-9% higher than what we're experiencing today. So we've had to make those operational cost increases that are higher than typical. And that's a big driver of why we're seeing a level services budget maybe as high as it is for next year at 7.1%. We also obviously have students that have needs and require services, and in some cases, students in our special education programs that we educate outside the district. And many of these schools that these students attend, private day placements, collaborative placements, and so forth, they're also feeling these increases. And so we've also seen much higher rate increases to their day programs or evening programs and everything that our students attend be higher than typical over the last couple of years. So we've had to make higher adjustments for those services as well for our special education student population. So because of everything's been a little bit higher, we're seeing a higher level services adjustment than we may have typically seen. And to compound those challenges on the expense side and these high rate increases, we're also seeing a loss of COVID-19 pandemic revenue, so known as the ESSER grants. You may have heard what that means. So those are the emergency relief funding that the school department has really had since fiscal year 2021 coming out of the pandemic. And we've tried to be as strategic as we could with the use of that funding, which is expiring for all districts across Massachusetts in June at the end of this school year, not to try to spend all that funding at once, to try to moderate the impact of the loss of that revenue, which we all knew was coming, and that time is here for next year. And the services that have been funded by this outside source and this federal grant, COVID-19 relief grant funding, are very much part of our program. And we've have certainly additional school nursing services that are extremely essential and important for coverage needs and so forth. We have additional school counseling and adjustment counselors for the mental health of our students at every level that we've been able to leverage this funding from these COVID-19 grants. And we also have technicians, because we had a robust increase in our technology during the last 3 or 4 years, and we are in one-to-one district K through 12. So we've needed to have the tech staff to maintain both student and staff devices. So we've had to shift the loss of that funding in these positions over into the operating budget, because they're very much essential and a part of our program of our services that we have been delivering here in North Reading. So that's also a part of why we're seeing a little bit higher than typical level services budget increase. So That budget, as currently presented, represents a 7.1% increase, as I mentioned, over current spending. And that currently has a gap of a little over $1.2 million. And this is the middle column I'm referring to. So there's obviously the funding challenges to fund level services. The revised budget proposal, that was what we refer to as a modified level services budget. And what the administration does each year is we determine what's level services, but then we have a strategic plan that we put together on an ongoing basis, and that really drives enhancements and to the educational program, and that's our objectives, our goals to move the district forward. And that's really a working document that Dr. Daly does an exceptional job presenting that to the school committee annually. And we look at and we try to be as conservative as we can. And we try to look at the spending ability by the community, and we don't try to go for all of those positions at once, but we want to still achieve our objectives and move the district forward. So on Monday night, we presented a sort of a revision to our strategic plan initiatives that would be reflected in our recommended budget, which is the third column. And we've kind of reduced some of those new positions, kind of looking at sustainability and the situation in terms of available revenues in the town. And we would like to add, the third column represents everything in level services, but it's an additional 1.6 FTE positions that are really guided by what is represented as key priorities in our strategic plan. And that is a 0.6 school adjustment counselor at the elementary level, and that would allow us to achieve our goal of having a designated school adjustment counselor to address mental health issues at every single school in the district, and we think that's a top priority. So that was the first position that was added. The second 1.0 position that's reflected, again, above and beyond level services in the third budget column is an academic interventionist. And we want to certainly address areas of learning loss that maybe have occurred over the last few years. We want to be very proactive in our early intervention strategies to help students in need in math or ELA, and particularly in the elementary level or across the district. And that is an extremely important position. So that's also being a top priority and is reflected in our revised budget proposal to the school committee for consideration at this point. In addition, what's also reflected in that revised budget is the desire to move to free full-day kindergarten. So currently, we are still have a tuition-based program. We currently have a fee of $2,500 to attend full-day kindergarten. We have one of 15 districts remaining in the Commonwealth of 351 districts that are still charging a tuition for students and families to access full-day kindergarten. So we are lagging behind in this area. It's been an initiative in our strategic plan for a number of years to hope that by fiscal year 2025, we would be able to offer free universal, full-day kindergarten. So we didn't want to back off on that initiative, so that in our revised recommended budget proposal would move towards free full-day kindergarten next year. And we do have a reserve of funding in that full-day kindergarten revolving account. So the money, the tuition that comes in, the revenue, that source of funds that comes in, has to support the expenses that are represented, the teachers and the paraprofessionals that work within that program. So the reality is, if we're going to try to use a sort of a reserve of funding over the next 2 or 3 years to lessen that financial revenue, loss of revenue. If we were to do that all in 1 year, it's really much higher than a $200,000 impact. It's more like $450,000. So we're going to try to lessen that impact over the next number of years. But that's certainly reflected in our recommended budget proposal in the third column. So that would add 4.0 FTE positions, the 2.4 enrollment, plus the additional 1.6 FTE, those positions I just spoke of, and it also would move to free full-day kindergarten. Those are really the main differences, and that is an increase of 8.1% over our current spending, and it's a gap of a little more than 1.5 million of what the available revenues are currently. So big picture, that's kind of everything we've been talking about. I did it as quickly as I could. over the last number of weeks. And then some of the things that we discussed on Monday evening is if we were unable to fund either the middle column or the third column, and we had to get to the current balanced budget of available revenues and reduce level services by $1.2 million, what would be at risk in terms of these are the areas that the school department would really have to turn to in terms of reducing current services to achieve that balanced budget. And we would certainly be looking at higher class sizes, again, and particularly in that primary grades of grades 1 and 2, where we don't want to see high class sizes. So our inability to add staffing to address the increase in enrollment would have a real impact on those class sizes, and they would be above the guidelines that we've tried to maintain here in North Reading. At the secondary level, and particularly at the high school, we would have to look at also classroom teaching positions, and there would be a reduced overall depth and breadth of the course options at the high school that we've worked so hard to maintain and achieve. The elective courses and advanced placement courses, there's a lot of offerings, and that would certainly be impacted. There would be less staffing available for support and early intervention strategies to address the areas of learning loss that I just spoke of, particularly math and ELA, so the inability to have those academic interventionists and tutors that we've had to address those areas would be impacted. There would be less resources and staffing available for mental health and counseling support at all levels. So our inability to not only fund an increase in that area, which is really where we want to be in school adjustment counselors and counseling, we may have to consider a reduction over the next few years, and that would certainly hurt our ability to achieve that objective. Less potential for less digital learning and technology staffing for not only instructions, but the ability to address support for our devices, both for students and staff. So we do have a technician that is being funded by the ESSER grant that I just spoke of. So if we're not able to fund some of that staffing level that we're currently at, there would be an impact. Potential of less nursing services available for coverage needs and everything that the additional nursing service that we've been able to add through the COVID-19 pandemic or ESSER grant would be impacted. We'd have to look at our cleaning staff, and that could be impacted. The standard of our cleaning in industry standard ratios of cleaning the square footage area would be impacted. Our ability to cover when we don't have a full complement of cleaning staff to ensure that we don't fall behind the cleaning areas. So certainly school health and so forth could be impacted. I think we'd have to look at athletic budget and potential coaches positions and where that stands, and we could have higher student to athlete coach ratios in specific sports. We'd have to look at our expense budgets, which are already kind of challenged in terms of our classroom materials and textbooks and technology that we embed into the classroom on a daily basis. So those are stretched thin. We're trying to make the appropriate increases based on the inflation and so forth that we've seen. So we'd have to take a hard look at those areas, and there could be an impact there as well. We're also trying to increase our ability to deal with the unforeseen building maintenance areas. So we're allowed to have an extraordinary maintenance line item in the budget to address these. We've seen the need for these unforeseen expenses, and particularly at some of the elementary schools, a little bit older buildings, more in the last few years. So we're trying to make the appropriate adjustments so we can deal with those unforeseen costs, and that the ability for us to do that would be lessened. And that would put pressure on other areas of the budget, where we want to keep those other areas in the budget for instruction as much as possible in learning. And then we'd have to probably look at a potential of increased fees to families, and that's something that we don't want to do. We don't look at any of those decisions lightly. We have not for a number of years. The school committee has had a long-standing budget goal to look at reducing fees the entire 11 years or so that I've been here. It's been a challenge, but we would have to kind of revisit some of those fees because of these increases for athletics, transportation, extracurricular-based programs. So that's sort of articulated in kind of bullet form where the areas that we would have to look at it, that we would be discussing, and having those conversations with stakeholders, with the school committee, with staff, with administrative leaders and budget leaders and our educational leaders. And we've been hearing feedback from the community through a webinar and through the hearing. So these are really the tough, difficult decisions that we've been talking about since we started this budget process for the last several weeks and really several months. But certainly as we approach the ability to try to move forward with a recommended budget, these next couple slides kind of take everything I just articulated and just apply the numbers and sort of the FTEs and of how we would reconcile that 1.2 million gap, again, from level services. So everything I just talked about, I don't think I have to go through it again because I would be repetitive, but everything I just articulated, these are the numbers in the FTEs behind that in terms of classroom teachers, counseling, technology staff, academic support, interventionists and tutors, cleaning, coaching staff, potential impact to our support and aides at the kindergarten level. These are all salary and personnel impacts. So this does add up to the 15.2 FTE of a potential reduction in our current staffing that was reflected on the first slide. On the expense side of the equation, again, the need to have to look at some of that instructional expense budgets, which are already tight as it is. We already have a reliance on many of our PTO and PTA groups and outside revenue sources of booster and support groups that help fund enrichment programs, field trips, and we would probably have to have more of an increased reliance on some of those things for some of the bare bones items, and we don't want to kind of get ourselves in that situation. We've tried to make adjustments because of some of these high rate increases to in-district special education in terms of, and out of district in terms of our transportation costs and our contractual services. But we would have to look at reducing some of those line items that we've tried to increase and adjust to the appropriate spending level. And then we could potentially risk those being underfunded, and then we'd have to reallocate and shift funding accordingly, and that puts pressure on other areas of the budget. We've been able to add over the last few years a late bus at the middle school or secondary level, and that's been vital to allow students to get extra help, to participate in extracurricular sports at the middle school. So we would have to kind of look at those areas of things that we've added more recently and that's really enhanced our ability to help students that could be impacted, and that late bus is one of them. We have one of the things that continues to be funded by the state is our food service. The state of Massachusetts continues to supplement and offer universal free lunch and breakfast to students. And that is revenue that's coming completely from the state or the federal USDA sources. So we've actually had a huge increase in our participation in our school lunch program by being able to offer free lunch. We've gone from about 35% participation. We've doubled that to about 70%. So we actually have a very healthy stream of revenue into our school revolving account for food service. So we can actually now, for the first time, not just try to be self-supportive and efficient of our direct costs in that program, which we have been. We can actually look at some indirect costs in terms of cleaning services and utilities that we're eligible and allowed to, and try to charge some of those expenses off to that stream of revenue, which would shift money out of the operating budget into that food service account. So that's an option that we now have that we would look at. And then again, the increased user fee potential and what we would have to do. So that is some recommendations, or not really recommendations, or some areas that we have discussed, that we have presented for consideration to the school committee, who will ultimately be seeking more information about each of these areas from administration. We will be debating these in detail over the next several weeks as we weigh these difficult decisions. Great. So,
Thank you, Michael. So I'm going to take a few moments to talk about the municipal budget now, and then we'll...
Can I ask you to dim the lights a little so that we can see the screen a little better?
Does anyone want to do that?
A little more atmosphere. Whoa. Everybody keep your hands on. I mean, it makes it
Blend the zeros.
a little bit. That's too dark, Michael.
Yeah, it's too bad that you can't just have the back one.
Yeah.
Just a second ago, just,
No, that's not good.
that's good, that's, uh-oh.
Michael, that's fine.
Those are the two options, folks.
No, that's it. We got to be able to see, we got to take notes.
Yeah.
That's good.
No, that's not good. No, Michael, we need some light.
I think it just goes up all the way, right?
Yeah, the best I can do is get those ones right above it are off, and anything else we'll turn everything off.
Yep.
Best we can do.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So I will speak to the municipal budget process, and then Lori Ann Galvin, the finance director, will speak to some capital and similar items, and then talk about projections. So for the municipal budget for fiscal year 2025, I'll just direct your attention to the numbers in red. We're showing a level services shortfall for fiscal year 2025 of just under $250,000. This particular fiscal year, my recommendation will be actually that we will need to increase that deficit due to the need to add 4 additional firefighters and their associated benefits. And that's a reflection of years of increasing call volume and a transition from a callback-based system where off-duty firefighters are helping staff the fire department to actually having on-duty firefighters. And it's part of a longer-term plan for the fire department that relies on both new and existing staff to rely ultimately less on having to call firefighters in for being off-duty. So we had a budget that was, I would say, somewhat in line with where we have been in previous fiscal years at this stage of the process, and unfortunately had to increase it because of this need. For those who don't know, that request for those 4 firefighters, this is, I think, either the 4th or the 5th year the fire chief has brought it up. If you saw his budget presentation on Saturday in March, it's been an increasingly urgent need to the point where I feel an obligation to recommend that it be funded. So that increased the shortfall for municipal departments to $586,902. We went through an exercise for the select board a couple of meetings ago to show a scenario of how we might balance the budget, kind of similar to what you heard from the school department through Mr. Conley. Some of these things are initiatives or positions that we were looking to get off the ground and just have not gotten off the ground, so they may be vacant. For example, I'll just speak to the grant manager position. That's something that we've been trying to initiate, but now would be in jeopardy. We have a couple of miscellaneous capital items that really should be funded from the operating budget that we could move to be funded with that free cash that I identified earlier. I'll note, though, a business manager for our Department of Public Works, it's certainly not a position that is necessarily frontline in providing direct services, but when you're trying to sort out what's going on with your utility billing, it's something that would certainly be beneficial. We had funded it in this fiscal year's budget, but we would need to eliminate it if we were forced to reconcile to the available revenue number. And then that last category, the $341,714, reductions that impact free cash generation. So what that is areas where we traditionally have not had to expend the full budget in a fiscal year and have had money left over. So at the end of the fiscal year, that money that's left over flows through a process where we close out the budget and it becomes available to be used in a future fiscal year. Some in business might call it a margin or something like that, where it's something that gives us a buffer or flexibility. But what's important to note is having that flexibility means if any one of those categories were to experience pressure in the expenditure, whether it's increased overtime or an increase in veterans benefits, we have the funding in place to fund that. Or alternatively, if we have challenges in another area of the budget, we have somewhere to transfer from at town meeting in order to make sure that we don't overexpend the budget, which we're not allowed to do under state law. Probably most importantly for purposes of this conversation is that $341,000 gets turned back in at the end of the year and gets rolled forward to help balance a future year's budget. And we'll talk more about that exercise in a few moments. So, that's a significant concern for the municipal budget. I think, being transparent, the impacts are not necessarily as dramatic in the municipal budget for fiscal year 2025, but there would be, and if we continue on the same trend, will be significant impact in fiscal year 2026. So again, I talked a little bit about generating the free cash and how it goes into fiscal year 2026. That funding left over is something we've used in prior years to avoid having to make reductions in both the municipal and school budgets. If we were not to have that tool available, we would be looking at a situation where we would be reducing the workforce beyond those positions that are vacant, or reducing expense accounts, which would expose us to potentially underfunded departmental budgets, which, similar to the school department, is not a situation that the town should be in, or I'm sure would want to be in. I'm going to talk a little bit about municipal needs, and that list is not intended to be that small to frustrate anybody. But there's a list of things that are on there that we've talked about in previous budget hearings. I'm going to just select a few of them. On the top are positions that, on the earlier slide, we had to basically say we needed to eliminate. Obviously, if that becomes a situation where they have to be eliminated, we still would be keeping them as something we would be looking to try to restore in a future fiscal year. So the grant manager, for example, the public works positions. And again, those reductions that impact free cash from one year to the next. Current services that are funded from other sources are Elder Services Outreach Assistant, $20,000 funded with a grant that expires at the end of June in 2025, so the end of the upcoming fiscal year. Our Youth Substance Abuse program, that's a $125,000 per year program that is currently funded by the federal government. And so we are in year 8 or 7? We're in year 8. 7, sorry. Year 7 of that program. It's had significant benefits to the community. I think all of the folks who are involved in developing the budgets are committed to trying to retain that program, but it results in an additional cost to the town once the program expires, which is in September of 2026. So that's not necessarily a request for fiscal year 2025, but we feel an obligation to make the community aware of the fact that it's a funding source that will expire. New initiatives, and by the way, I'll say that's a 5-year grant program. We've actually been able to benefit from it twice, or a total of 10 years, but we're not eligible beyond the 10th year. New initiatives that are not yet funded, one thing that we've heard a lot about is access to space for the senior center. That is right now being done at 1 day per week. There's a funding request for the town to take over funding that from some grant funds that were provided by the Friends of the Council on Aging, so that in fiscal year 2025, this upcoming year, the town would actually be paying for that rental. And that's because, for those who are not familiar with the space, the third meeting house, or the building on the common as it's known, is our designated senior center. It's essentially a single room facility that is small and not able to accommodate the demand for programming that has been expanding in recent years. We think there may be an opportunity to benefit to the community to looking to rent space, perhaps. That would be a significant cost, a little under $50,000 per year. So we've put that as a need that's not necessarily got a funding source right now. I'm not going to go through this entire list, and for those who are looking, this will be posted on the town's website tomorrow. But a couple things that we have heard from our DPW. We don't have a dedicated tree maintenance crew, which I think for some might be surprising to hear, because we do a decent job of cleaning up after storms using our highway crew. But a community with the suburban canopy that we have and the number of trees that we have, that's a need that's been identified by the DPW, both in terms of the crew, so it would be staff and the equipment as well. From a human services standpoint, we've heard for a need for help in our youth services and additional capacity in our veterans services departments. Our recreation program is seeking assistance in being able to fund a maintenance craftsman, so it'll be additional parks staff, basically. But their revenues are not able to sustain that on their own, so they need the general fund's help, the taxpayers' help, so that's in here for the request. Two positions that have been identified in discussions with the select board, one to assist in staffing in the town administrator's office, as well as an outreach position, public outreach position for the in the town administrator's office as well. And that position is something that we see as being able to better interface all of what the municipal departments are doing with the online community, because that's where so much of the discussion is happening, that's where so much feedback gets generated. But as you know, by virtue of the way our government's run, our town meeting needs to be in person. Our voting needs to be done, if not in person, then by mail early. So we're trying to marry the 19th, 18th century structure of government with the modern day world there. The police department, we've identified, that not necessarily a need right away, but could be something that the community wants to consider for overnight staffing once we transition to regional 911 dispatch. That's something that we're going to be monitoring, but we feel it's important to identify. And then I've identified 2 lines there for employee benefits for the positions that are above the lines, as well as any unforeseen needs. So those total up to $1.483 million, $1.484 million in potential needs for future fiscal years. I'm going to ask Lorianne Galvin, the finance director, to come up and just speak to our fixed cost and capital needs, as well as the projections. Lorianne sort of is the support for, along with Mr. Kelleher, the Capital Improvement Planning Committee, but also developing many of the projections that you've seen along with Mr. Conley. So, Lorianne.
Good evening. To start off, we have a number of large projects this year. Chestnut Street Bridge, as everyone knows, the road's closed. The bridge has to be replaced. We've recently learned that Burrows Road Bridge, the culvert there, will have to be replaced. And we need 2 large fire apparatus, one being a ladder truck. So the additional debt service on those far exceeds what we normally have in the budget, our annual operating budget. So if we had to borrow for those 3 projects at once, it would not be able to fit within our current budget. Additionally, traditionally, we've been funding our annual debt service from our capital improvement stabilization, but we've been doing that by taking our free cash each year when it closes out. If we have extra free cash, we put it in the capital improvement stabilization, and then we transfer it out to fund the debt service. So as we tighten up our budgets, we have less turnbacks, or we increase our revenue estimates to be able to fund more within the operating budget. The free cash, there isn't as much each year. So going forward, we would need to fund even the base, the 1.6 million annual debt service, from our operating budget. Additionally, the capital plan, we should be funding $350,000 to $400,000 a year from the operating budget, because we have an extensive capital request each year for vehicles, building repairs, things like that. So again, we've been using free cash for those items, and really it is something, again, as the free cash dries up, we should be funding from the operating. The snow and ice deficit, same thing each year. We budget a certain amount for snow and ice, but with the amount of salt, the plowing, the contractors, that amount of money adds up quickly, what we expend each and every year. So if we don't have free cash to fund it, or we don't plan to fund it in our operating budget, we have to essentially raise it on our recap sheet, our taxes, and it means we have to cut into reduce our other budgets. And then additionally, each year we typically have retirements that have to be funded, whether it be career end, vacation, or those types of things. So we've been funding that from free cash on an annual basis. So as you can see, as we tighten our budgets and we push our revenue estimates to be able to fit more in, we can't rely on the free cash, so there's more we have to fit in the operating budget. This, again, it's small, but this is our capital request for 2025. It totals $16 million. You can see the bridges are there. There are vehicles. There are building repairs, various, like handicap accessibility for town buildings, the list, expansion of the cemetery. The list goes on and on. There's only so much we can fund in a given year between free cash and our bonding, but whatever we don't fund in one year just moves to the next year. This will show you that we do a 5-year plan for our capital. Every department has their list. They try to space things out. All departments, police, fire, you can see the requests from the highway division, the engineering division, the school department, and this list totals over $50 million. So no matter what we do, there's something else in the next year. Did you want to speak?
So just a little bit about the budget challenges. Property taxes account for $56.2 million in revenue out of a $72.3 million general fund budget for fiscal year 2024. So that's the year that we're in right now. The rest of our revenue is state aid, departmental revenue, excise tax, investment income, and transfers from other funds. The property taxes for existing buildings and developed land represents the town's only source of revenue that's predictable over the long term. New growth, which is new buildings or renovations and development of land, increases property taxes each year, but it's not necessarily predictable over the long term. Over a 20-year period, which we looked back, it was last year now we did this exercise, our average cost increases exceeded the revenues. So our fixed costs were about 5% per year on average. The municipal departments were about 3.3%, and the school departments were about 4.1%. New growth, so new construction and development, has been a stabilizing force in our budgets, going back to the development of subdivisions with larger homes and larger house lots in the 1990s, Edgewood Apartments in the 2000s, and now the ongoing and nearly complete construction of Martin's Landing at the J.T. Berry property from the 2010s and 2020s. More recently, our conservative budgeting has allowed the town to generate free cash, as I described on an earlier slide, that's left over from one year's budget and used to fund certain costs in the next year's budget. The number you've seen in the previous slides and upcoming slides reflect adjustments that will reduce how much free cash is generated, resulting in reduced funding that would be available for fiscal year 2026 and beyond. So this is just a note to remind folks, for those of you at the June town meeting, we identified in red there that this year would be difficult and that we would face difficult discussions about our priorities and what we can and can't afford to do within the limits of Proposition 2.5 and our other revenue streams. So we have a couple slides here that will just go through our projections of revenue versus expenses, where you'll see the numbers in red will highlight some of the deficits that we're dealing with, as well as not only a 3-year projection, which is what's up here, but there's actually a 20-year projection that we've done. So Lorianne, I don't know if you want to take us through that.
Okay. So in the 25 column, this reflects both the level services request and the modified level services request of both the municipal and the school department. You'll see the 586,902 was on the municipal slide, and the modified level services of the 1,561,000 was on the school department slide. In this scenario, we are funding our debt service, retirements, snow and ice deficit, and our capital improvement from free cash. As you'll notice in the 26 column and the 27 column, the deficits for both municipal and school get much larger. But the reason for that is we've had to put those items back in the budget to be funded from operating, from the tax levy, from the estimated receipts. And that's why it drives the municipal and school budgets to look like they're in much more of a deficit situation. In the next slide, you'll see, so in this slide, even if we were to hold municipal and school increases to the 2.5% that the state allows the tax levy to grow by, we would have a substantial, a $17 million deficit by 2043. It just grows and grows because our fixed costs, which we can't really control, grow faster than the tax rate allows. In this scenario, this is more of our, and this was based on a 20-year history, on what our actual growth has been. The municipal side grows about 3.3% a year, the schools grow about 4.1%, and our fixed costs grow about 5%. So as you can see, we're close to a $50 million deficit by 2043.
So, the town's options. The financial planning team, who is before you here, has been managing the town's budget in recent years, relying on that new growth and using free cash to stabilize the budget. We brought that budget through the select board, the finance committee, to town meeting, and each year it's been adopted. As we've mentioned several times, the solutions are running out, leaving the town with limited options. One being to reduce school and municipal services and potentially our capital investments to match our forecasted revenue. The impacts of doing so will be felt in the school department this upcoming fiscal year, and more noticeably in the municipal departments the following fiscal year. We would have to either further reduce school and municipal budgets to fund necessary capital investment, draw from available funds that are targeted for major projects, including building projects, or defer projects, such as the Chestnut Street Bridge, to another point in the future. Alternatively, the town could consider an increase in the property tax revenue in the form of a Proposition 2.5 override. So the financial planning team looked at the municipal, school, and fixed budget deficits, future needs, and developed a proposal that I'm going to go through here. I'll note that what you see is generally projected to cover essentially 3 fiscal years' time, fiscal year 2025, 2026, and 2027. I think our hope was to be able to present something that would carry the town further, maybe more like a 5-year projection, but we were trying to limit the extent of the impact on the taxpayer, given the multitude of things that follow behind in terms of other investment and projects that we may need to do. So a Proposition 2.5 override here that we've presented for the starting point for discussion would be a total of $10 million per fiscal year. So there's 3 components of it. I'm going to start from the bottom there. The municipal costs and the school costs. So roughly $4.3 million and $2.1 million, respectively. Those are basically allocated using a formula right now that we've sort of left open for an allocation. It used to be basically 2-to-1 or 1/3, 2/3 type allocation of funding between the school and municipal budgets. We've adjusted that over the years depending upon the challenges for the school or municipal budgets.
Mr. Jabbar, can I just clarify?
Yeah.
I think you said $10 million per fiscal year. I think you meant over 3.
Sorry, I should say that.
Because that's a big difference, just to be clear.
No, that's, and I thank you for correcting me.
Yeah.
So we're talking about $10 million, and we're talking about phasing in up to a total of $10 million.
Over 3.
Which over 3 years, which would then be carried forward, yes. Thank you.
Difference.
So in that $10 million, again, roughly $4.3 million for school costs and $2.1 million phased in over that 3-year period. And then the top is $3.5 million for fixed costs and town-wide budget stabilization. So what does that $3.5 million include? It's the debt required for the Chestnut and Borough Street bridges, the fire department ladder truck, the replacement of using free cash for our existing debt in the amount of $1.6 million, the replacement for the use of free cash for snow and ice, which we've been doing in recent years, as well as other future capital projects. Again, that would also be phased in over a 3-year period. The totaling up to $10 million. Again, on the formula for the school and municipal costs, that's the current allocation. It's subject to change from year to year as conditions may warrant and as voted by town meeting. So a little bit about the Proposition 2.5 override. While the total amount is $10 million, again, the intention of the financial planning team is to recommend a phasing in approach over 3 years. It's not binding. It is subject to town meeting approval each year to approve funding of projected increases in years 2 and 3. So when I say that, I mean appropriating the funds at town meeting. The vote for the override itself, which would need to be done at the ballot as well, that would be a single vote that would, as presented here, be brought to the town this June. The exact allocation and impact for fiscal year 2025 is not determined at this point in time, but again, it would be the intention of the financial planning team to recommend phasing over 3 years. I'll just note the amount doesn't have to be $10 million. It could be some other amount that the elected and appointed officials feel is appropriate. That said, the number of years into the future that an override will address our deficits is directly related to the amount that's actually approved in that override. Information on the impact on property owners may be found on the following slide, which I'll go through. I'll just note that in the absence of an operating override, we still will need to identify funding for the Chestnut and Burroughs Road culverts, as well as the ladder truck, and that they most likely would need to be funded through a debt exclusion. So this is just a snapshot right off of the state's website. What it basically says to you is that for the average single-family home in North Reading, assessed at $811,899, the single-family tax bill impact, once that full $10 million is realized over those 3 years, would be $1,721.22. If we were to break that, so I'm going to go to the next slide because that'll show you a better breakdown. So that, again, just shows what basically was on that prior sheet. That grid that you saw was basically increments of $50,000 for evaluation of a home. For someone who's trying to figure out for their own property, what are we talking about? The impact on the tax rate is $2.12 per $1,000 evaluation. So to figure out how much it might mean for your property, take your assessed value, so not the value that Zillow says or that Realtor.com might say, but what the town has the property assessed at. You divide it by $1,000 and multiply by $2.12. Again, that would be the maximum number phased in and up to over a 3-year period. Other pending considerations, we have ongoing efforts for a fire station reconstruction project that could be brought forward as soon as June or another soon upcoming town meeting. The estimated cost for that project is between $20 and $25 million, which would mean between $220 and $280 for that average single-family homeowner for a period of 30 years. And that would be, again, a debt exclusion funded project. Construction of a wastewater or sewer utility has been under review since October of 2021, when a vote authorized funding for planning, design, and permitting. If approved, the project would result in a potential additional cost of approximately $1,000 for the average single-family homeowner over a 30-year period. The project will also provide wastewater capacity for housing and economic growth, which may bring additional tax revenue in the long term. Additional considerations, some of you are familiar with these projects that we've talked about. An intergenerational community center that folks have been discussing. That's a possible $25 million approximate project, with which I've funded, if funded as a debt exclusion, would be just about $285 per year for the average single-family taxpayer. And these are projects that are being looked at least the top two, and the top two and the very last one by our Facilities Master Plan Committee. Town hall renovation or reconstruction, currently in an old elementary school. If that were a $10 million project, it'd be roughly $113 per year for the average single-family taxpayer. Again, these are future considerations. There's no timeline for these projects. A Hood School modular classroom replacement, that is something the school committee is looking to study in the upcoming fiscal year. Would be at least a $2 million project that would need to be funded by debt exclusion. That would be approximately $32 per year for the average single-family taxpayer. There's been some discussion about the need for a West Side Fire Station. That could be a $15 million project at $170 per year for the average single-family taxpayer. And we have multiple other facilities that have needs that I think you're all familiar with in the Damon Tavern, the Third Meeting House, et cetera. Those are all future considerations that we just want folks to know we are aware of. We want you to be aware of. There's no concrete plan or timeline for these projects at this point. They could be, multiple years or even decades away, but we feel it's important to identify them as well. So why not use other available funds to solve our budget gaps? Our fiscal year 25 budgets have already been adjusted to rely on the funds that we would generally end up using because they're left over from a prior year. We do have approximately $15 million in funds from the sale of the former J.T. Berry property in hand. The property was developed to be Martin's Landing. The funds are restricted and can only be used for capital improvements and debt service. Given the extent of the potential major construction projects on the horizon that I identified in the prior two slides, the funds may be necessary to stabilize the impact of those projects on taxpayers. The town does have multiple stabilization and other funds that have specific purposes, including for capital improvements and for certain school department costs. Using some or all of those funds to the extent allowed, which is not much, would only delay the problem and would not resolve it. Just a note from the superintendent and myself, our role as administrators and professional staff is to share with you the history, the projections, their impacts, and the options available to the town. Ultimately, the decisions to be made are in the hands of the town meeting and the voters. The direction that we proceed in, including the options and the recommendations that we make to town meeting and the voters, are guided by the elected and appointed officials that are here in the room this evening. We are here to assist and to guide, but under state conflict of interest and campaign finance laws, we are limited to some extent in our ability to recommend and or advocate potential options. And I'll just note that for municipal and school employees, there are further restrictions on them as well in their official capacity. Folks obviously have rights as individual citizens, but there are restrictions on all of us as public employees. So next steps, I think the most important one is an override something that folks want factored into fiscal year 2025 June town meeting planning efforts? And if so, how much? The financial planning team would continue to work on the budget for fiscal year 25 and beyond, including how we allocate potential override funds over multiple years. To have options, the select board would need to place an article with two options or columns, one with Proposition 2.5 and one that is within Proposition 2.5 and one that's contingent on the town voting at a ballot election that would take place after town meeting. The select board would also need to call a ballot election, which would likely follow the June town meeting with 35 days notice. So we wouldn't be waiting to town meeting to call that because we would run out of time based on the town meeting date of June 10th. Town meeting and the ballot election approval would need to be by majority vote. And that concludes this presentation, and open it up for questions, or I think more importantly, discussion.
So I will start.
We'll start with the select board.
With the select board. And we have a question from Ms. Minipelli.
I have about 7.
I didn't think it would be one.
Well, some of them
Can I just, I think people should speak in the microphone so that the folks at NORCAM, so if you guys can pass your microphones around.
Some of them, I think, can be addressed rather quickly by you, because as you were going along in the presentation, and as Mr. Connolly was going along in the presentation, I think these are not rhetorical questions. I think these are for edification of people that sometimes I get these questions, and I'm sure my colleagues do. How is it that we have money left over for free cash if we're projecting a budget deficit? Why aren't we using that money? You sort of talked about it a minute ago, but how do we have free cash left over if we're showing all these budget deficits?
So up until now, we've been able to maintain conservative budgeting in each fiscal year. Conservative budgeting means leave more flexibility, appropriate more funding than we might necessarily need. And when the end of the fiscal year comes, that funding is left over. We then use it in the next fiscal year to usually fund debt service. Honestly, that's the biggest thing that we do, which is range from between $1.3 and $1.6 million. In the balanced budget scenario that we talked about, so for the school department, it was roughly $1.2 million, I think, in reductions that need to be made. We've exercised all of those options. We've already absorbed generating extra money at the end of the fiscal year. And so we feel an obligation to indicate that we're coming forward with a budget that has these steps in it. In the case of the school department, it's not addressing their needs. And in the case of the municipal departments, it's not addressing the needs, and it's going to cause a challenge in that next fiscal year.
So I just want to kind of iron out the free cash
Sure.
issue, though, too. So the follow-up question is what would happen if we just applied all that extra free cash to all this budget deficit?
Sure.
Just a straightforward level services projected deficit in both this year's projected deficit without adding any of those extra positions.
So I think you're asking if we took the free cash we have
Use
left.
the whole thing.
So, we would have likely consequences with our bond rating agencies. They would look at it, they would say, okay, you're using a significant amount of money that's not guaranteed to be there. And in fact, you've said won't be there because of the adjustments that you've made in the budget to fund your upcoming year's budget. That could impact our bond rating for sure in the future. The other thing I'll just say is it would delay a problem that we know we can't fund and would not be able to fund by one fiscal year, basically.
So it's only covering it for that one time,
Correct.
but these are our ongoing expenses that are costing us money.
They are.
So you mentioned that the override is permanent, so whatever amount is fixed for that override amount, if the town wants to do it, that becomes the new base to which the 2.5% annually gets added from then on.
That's correct.
It's permanent.
Yes.
And then you also said that you talked about the distinction between the override versus the debt exclusion vote.
Mm-hmm.
So the debt exclusion vote is not permanent. That ends after the project term, or the 30-year term, I think is what you said.
That's correct,
Once
yes.
once it comes off the books, so to speak, that the tax is reduced by that amount.
That's correct. Once the project has been paid off, or once the bond or loan for the project has been paid off, the tax increase goes away.
This might be for Michael, this question. Michael, Mr. Connolly, you mentioned the increases in the school bus contract. Do we have how many years is that contract for?
So we initially contract for 3 years, but we were allowed to have an option to go out as long as 5 years. So this current fiscal year, school year, represents the end of the 3rd year. So next year is one of 2 years for an option, as an option year.
Okay.
So we investigated those options and looked at the market and looked at what the current rates per day per bus was trending for districts in our area, our geographical area that were going out to bid. And they were far greater, believe it or not, than us exercising that 4th optional year. So that's why we felt it was advantageous to do that.
So they already bid for years 4 and 5 for this contract that are.
Correct.
Yeah.
3, yeah, correct.
So that's actually going to be cheaper. And
Correct.
to put in layperson's terms, that's
a
going to
cost
be the
avoidance
cheaper
there
option.
for us to-
And we're using NRT for our busing?
So we are North Suburban Transportation now.
Okay, all right. The town created a special fund based on the statute to allow surplus or payments in for extraordinary special education needs or funds that you incur. What is the balance that's in that account right now?
So I'm going to defer to Ms. Galvin on that.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's just over 300,000.
Okay. So that's just basically the amounts that the town has put in annually.
Correct.
It hasn't been drawn on?
With interest.
And it's generated interest, okay.
Can I make one comment on that, too? Just on that, to that comment, I would just say, the purpose of that account when we created it was primarily to address increased special education costs within a year that couldn't be budgeted for. So if we know that there's going to be an increase for next year, we should calculate that in the budget. It's more, if a student moves in, sometimes we have students move in where the cost of an out of district placement might be $100,000, $150,000. So primarily that account was created to deal with the unanticipated expenses and not looking forward and saying, well, we know special education costs are going to be more expensive next year.
It's just basically
Yeah, just
for
to
the
clarify.
unanticipated, yeah. Can you put that slide on that was showing the school, the levels, the 3 different budgets there? So there's a missing column as I look at this. So you have your balanced budget, and then you have your level services, but did you do any kind of calculation of the in-between? So let's say we don't do the reduction of 15.2, but we also don't add 2.4. So in other words, you want to provide the level services, which we know are going to cost more, but not add to staffing. Do you have any projections like that? Because let's say, you get to revise budget proposal 2 or 3 years down the line, you might be able to add those 2.4 or 4, through attrition as people come and go from the school district, as people that are working for the school district, or they retire. So did you do any projection in between the layoffs, I guess is what we would call it, the 15.2 versus adding, just keeping it level, balanced, without adding?
Just to clarify, the 2.4 are not new positions. Those are positions that would continue level services. So the same class ratio, so these are enrollment driven. So that is considered level services, and that's how we do that. So in order to have class sizes maintained at the elementary and the primary grades at the same level with new move-ins, we are proposing there's 2.4 additional positions that would account for that enrollment. Because otherwise you wouldn't be able to offer, the 0.4 kind of makes up some of the specialists. You have additional classes that are needed. You have to have additional section of art, additional section of music, additional section of PE. So in order for all students to maintain the number of periods they go to art, music, PE, and the class sizes in the elementary schools at the primary grades, there's 2.4.
Yeah.
So if we didn't have that 2.4, it would not be level services. So there's not an in-between.
If you didn't have that, though, but you kept on the 15.2, because the 15.2, I think in the next slide says 3 elementary are gone, right? Right, elementary classroom, 3 are gone. So if you go back to that other slide, that's part of your 15.2 reduction. So if you didn't reduce based on your balanced, but you didn't add, that means you're going to have bigger classroom size, obviously, but you're not going to make 15.2 employees redundant, I guess. You have a middle column in between those two.
The cost of adding the 2.4 FTE is just about $200,000.
Okay.
Just shy, about $199,000 and change.
Okay.
So I think what Dr. Daly was saying, I think we all understand that, is that the need is now.
Yes.
So we don't really, to maintain the class sizes and deal with that increase, we can't really wait for attrition to happen down the road for level services. But that adjustment for enrollment to maintain level services was $200,000.
Okay. So it would be about, it would actually be in the vicinity of maybe
1 million.
1 million instead of 1.2, about that?
I would just add one more comment on this, though. Depending on the specifics from the year, teachers' contracts have a limit on how many students can be in a class. So for example, if you had a large incoming kindergarten class, and you had been running 7 sections, it might be contractually obligated to add an 8th section if there was a larger class coming in. And so what's happened at certain of the elementary schools, some classes are smaller, so we can get away with 2 sections at the little school. Others have 3 sections. But depending on how many there are, it's not only just class size, it's also contractual obligations about how many students can be in that class. So even if we were to say, well, let's put 25 kids in a class, 26 kids in a class, at some point you get to a point where you can't put more kids in the class. You have to add the sections for the contractual requirements of our contracts too.
You mean your contract with the teachers?
With teachers. And,
dictates how many students are going to be in the room?
There are limits to how many students can be in a class, yeah. So if there's a large incoming kindergarten section and we had 7 sections across the district and you had, a bunch more students moving in, we would have to add some additional sections. And so the idea here, when we're saying class sizes, it's both optimal class sizes for learning, but it's also trying to make sure they're aligned with what the teachers can teach.
Okay.
So.
Is there a specific, Madam Chair, I don't have them
go.
anymore. And some of it has to
already
do with the
recognized
kindergarten
that.
too, but
Yeah.
is there a specific, in your contract with the teachers, is there a specific number of students that's dictated as, what's that number?
30 right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but for this, right now, balanced budget, you don't have, you're not counting 30. And for the level services, you're not counting 30. You would be increasing class size if you had to let go of staff, right?
Correct.
Okay, so you could go up to 30.
You can go up to
Yeah.
30 at a max.
You're leading me to my next question about, so your revised budget proposal where you want to offer free care, how many right now, how many kindergarten slots do you have to offer the community?
As many as they need. We have to educate every child for kindergarten. And for a number of years, anybody that's wanted full-day kindergarten has been given full-day kindergarten.
So you don't actually turn people away from kindergarten?
No.
So how many do you typically have enroll?
It varies based on birth rates and so forth, but I think we're in the 175 student range to 190, on average, the last 3 years.
175 that are enrolled in where do you, for the 3, are they spread out over the 3 schools?
Right.
Yes, correct.
How many are in each school? Did you just send them to all 3 different schools, or do they get to go around where they?
Try to
We-
prioritize
yeah.
home district, whatever possible.
And is that number including morning and afternoon?
There's the morning and afternoon.
I know, I haven't had a kindergartner in a long
Yeah,
time.
the full-day program, the morning and afternoon is the half day, so there's just one.
Okay.
But we don't do the AM, PM.
So you are talking about a free full day?
Since one of the benefits we've seen with lowering the tuition, we've gone from 40, 50, just to go back a few years, half-day, down to 7. There's only 7 people that are opting for half-day now because we've taken that barrier on the tuition away.
So do you have a price tag attendant to that free kindergarten based on your enrollment? Do you have an idea of how much that would be? Just because in the revised ask, to me, that's a big ask. I'm just saying that's a big ask to ask people to have an override to provide that, unless that's something that we're gonna gain, obviously, by an educated population, but it's a big ask unless it goes across a lot of households here.
Sure.
It's a big ask to ask for an override unless that helps a lot of different households.
Well, again, the total impact of that was $200,000.
Okay.
So it's not a huge
Yeah.
impact.
Well, that's what I was wondering, what's the
So it's
price?
out of the,
Did you say 2 to 450 though?
Yeah.
so.
Right, so how much do we collect?
So we collect based on the families that desire a full-day kindergarten, based on the 2,500 tuition. We collect, on average, about $450,000. So that is our budget offset. So if that were to just completely go away, that is the true cost impact of that.
Okay.
Through conservative budgeting and spending, we have a bit of reserve that's built up over a number of years in that revolving account that tuition comes in and flows into.
Okay.
So for us to try to get to our goal and offer free full-day kindergarten, we're trying to simulate how we spent the ESSER funds down kind of moderately over a few years. So we didn't all spend the $1 million in 1 year.
Yeah.
We're going to try to use that reserve so it just kind of lessens that impact of 450 over the next
Delays
number.
the impact.
Delays the impact over the next few years.
See. Okay.
But ultimately, down the road, that becomes a $450,000.
Okay.
Correct.
I might just address it, because I know this does come up. You know, as Michael said, we're one of 15 districts that still have a tuition-based kindergarten. There's a possibility on the horizon that might become a requirement as well, so we're trying to work toward that goal. The Student Opportunity Act, which is a reimagination of the funding formula for the state, we have to choose various, from a drop-down menu of things we have to make as goals, and one of their goals is free universal pre-K. So that's what a lot of districts are working toward. We have special permission because we're one of the few districts that still have kindergarten, that we can make that our goal. That's been our 3-year goal for the last 3 years. We haven't met that goal, but we've been able to report progress on that goal. And it was the goal that was supported by, you know, the feedback we received from our school community to continue with a goal moving into the next plan that goes through 2027. So we showing progress toward that goal and making that, you know, an equitable outcome for students that, you know, can't afford full-day K. With all that is done during that time period and the foundation that a solid kindergarten, as you spoke to about a more educated student that's going to receive that foundational skill, it's a really important thing that students in other communities are getting free full-day K and have been for several years.
Okay. 2 more questions. Thank you. I know that's been a goal. We've heard about this. We've heard about this every budget season, so I know it's a great goal. I'm just wondering what the price tag would be, so. Mr. Gilberto, you mentioned our substance coordinator, a substance counselor,
Yes,
and the funding that dries up, and that's Amy, right?
correct.
Amy's writes a grant every year. That's how we've been able to benefit from her services here. Are we able to use the settlement proceeds from the opioid litigation to cover that, the cost of that position?
We may be able to. We do have a revenue.
So we don't lose her?
We do have a revenue stream over a multi-year period that we may be able to use at least partially for that, yes.
And is there any thought towards utilizing, I know it's a Band-Aid, it's going to run out, that's going to run out too, but is there any thought to utilizing any of that towards some of these adjustment counselor or other positions in the school? Because undoubtedly, that's part of a piece of probably what those individuals are dealing with there too.
That's something we can look further into to see how we may be able to utilize and where there might be crossover. As you know, there are restrictions on those funds, but that's a possibility.
Okay, my last question, because you talked about all of these different needs, and you mentioned the wastewater, and you mentioned the fire, and you mentioned all of those different other projects. I just want you said this, but I think there's going to be an idea that somehow everybody in this room is going to surreptitiously try to do this override to cover all of those projects, including wastewater. And I just want to make it abundantly clear. You were just explaining those to us to show us we have these future capital needs. But this is not the same thing as what you're talking about for the budget needs.
That's
We're
correct.
not mixing them together, even though you gave us those.
Sure. So that's a great point to clarify, because I went as far as talking about what the impact would be on the taxpayer. What the financial planning team has brought forth is a $10 million override phased in over 3 years for basically the town's operating budget. Does not include a fire station renovation project, a wastewater project, or any of the construction projects that are listed on the next slide. Those would all be separate projects that would need to be considered by town meeting and possibly the voters at a future point in time.
Okay.
But it does include, I'm sorry.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
It does include the debt service on some of the smaller projects.
The bridges.
Chestnut Street and Borough Street.
I wouldn't call them small, but.
Yeah, smaller.
Yeah, and just to kind of talk a little bit, the group here, we're cognizant that there's a lot of other needs out there. And so what we were trying to do is say, over the next 3 years, what are the things we have to do so that you don't get hit over and over by, well, now you need to vote for a debt exclusion to open Chestnut Street again, or Burroughs Road is, the culvert is failing. And so you can see we didn't try to just look at operational budgets. We tried to look at the capital projects as well so that we're not coming to the town over and over again. We're trying to look at all of the most immediate things over the next 3 years.
Just quickly, I don't know if we framed the last time there was an override in the town.
Yeah, so in 2005, there was a $1.1 million Proposition 2.5 override that was presented and approved as an override for the schools, for the school department specifically. We have not had an override. We may have had an attempt in the late 2000s, but none have prevailed other than for debt exclusion construction purposes, but not for operating costs.
And Mr. Gilberto, if I may, and I'll also point out that I researched this a little bit. Since 2005, when we had an override, 60% of towns have passed a Proposition 2.5 override, and 74% have voted on one. So we're not unusual in having expenses that go up faster than revenues. More than half of the towns have done it since we did.
That's not what Facebook said.
So I'm going to continue to take questions from the select board, and then when they're done, we can move on to school, and then we'll go down. No, I'm sorry, but we're going to discuss with the committees. If there's time at the end, we'll take questions from the public, but it's really not a public hearing to ask questions. Possibly at the end. We have time. Mr. Wallner?
3 just quick things. One is, I just want to be clear, the average property tax for homes is about $10,000 per year. We're saying it's going to be $1,700 over 3 years, meaning the first year would be a plus $600, the next year would be another $600, and the year after that would be another $600, right?
Something like that.
About.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
just to keep it very simple, because
Yes.
people are going to hear 1,700 and think that's going to go on for their bill next year, but that's not the case.
Very
It's going to be incremental for the 3 years going forward.
That's the intention, yes.
That's a clarification thing, right? Okay. So then,
Mr. Wallner, I'm sorry, not to interrupt you, but, to be clear to everyone in the room, town meeting has a say in that, too. Town meeting has to approve the appropriation each year in the budget. So even if somebody, at some point down the road, said, well, we're going to ask for the whole amount in the second year, town meeting, we need to authorize that.
Yeah.
I think it's 2/3.
Thank you, Mr.
It's a majority vote, it's a 2/3 vote, correct?
A majority vote.
Majority vote.
Majority vote, yes.
Majority. Okay, thank you. All right, then, from the school point of view, I actually go to your website and look at things, so. But I think it would be helpful to the town if there was some key metrics associated with the numbers you're bringing out. So, for example, when we talk about full-time, talking about teacher-to-student ratio, I know when I've looked at that, we have a very favorable ratio compared to other communities. I would actually like, and I think the town would be interested to know when they're trying to make this decision, what does that look like compared to other communities that are comparable to us? And then if we're not funding to an override, what does that look like? Because I do think that teacher-to-student ratio is a very important metric. But we need something to be able to frame it. There's no reference point. And unless you go to the website, you can't see that we're actually very favorable compared to other communities, at least from what I've seen on your website.
Yeah, and we went through some of this at the school committee meeting the other night, if you guys want to speak about this. And just to also point out, it's taken us a long time. We've been meeting every week to try to figure out the number here.
Sure.
I agree. Some of the upcoming meetings we'll be able to talk more once we sort of have a consensus of the board. But before we got too far down the road, we wanted to figure out, is this the number that we're going to put out there? And so I think there'll be a lot more coming, but we were asking these same questions on Monday night at the school committee meeting, so I'll turn it over to Dr. Daly and
You don't even have
Mr.
to
Connolly?
answer now. I'm just saying.
Well, no, we have some
If you have it.
general ideas,
Yeah,
and
but I think that for the future, as this goes forward, I think people need to hear that and
Right.
understand how we compare to other communities.
And before you go any further, that's a good point that you just brought up. We will be, and I'm going to target this to you, Mr. De Niro, just because I know you wanted to ask a question. We will be having further informational meetings that you will be able to ask the questions at. But tonight, we're trying to get all of the committees. A lot of the members are hearing a lot of this for the first time because they're not in the financial planning team. So this is really to just get everybody on board, get their questions answered, make some decisions. And then we'll be having further hearings that you will be able to interact.
I come to every meeting, so I think I should have a right to ask a question now and then.
Okay. So just one last thing.
Yeah.
So related, it would be good to see the cost per student, how much it costs per student per year. And if you know that historically, that'd be good. And again, compared to other communities. Because I believe we've always been on the low side, but I don't know if that's still the case anymore. And so I think, for people to make good decisions, I think that would be information we need to share with people. Maybe there's other metrics that I'm not thinking of, but those to me are the two most obvious ones that help people digest what's going on and have a reference point so they can make a decision and feel good about it.
And it's very helpful. And one thing that's very confusing in the public is the student-teacher ratio versus the class size, because some
Yes.
metrics take just the number of adults, the number of kids, and come up with a ratio. But there are some classrooms that require 2 or 3 teachers due to student special needs, and there are other classrooms where there's 1 teacher with a group of students. So
Yeah.
we have that in our budget book, and we can make that a little bit more part of the presentation, as that's a good point.
That'd be good. Thank you very much. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. O'Leary, do you have questions?
Just, I don't know if the questions, comments, or
Either.
observations, or whatever they are, but other than, this isn't, I guess it's not a surprise to any of us in this room, that we're in this situation. And to Mr. Buckley's point, we've actually done a pretty good job over the years to prevent ourselves from getting into this position for so many years. But as many as 75% of the communities have already been faced with similar situations and proposals. I think what's somewhat staggering is that, for $10 million, this only gets us through 3 years.
Yeah.
And I think the first question that's going to be on people's minds and coming out of their mouths are, so what does that mean in 3 years you're coming back looking for some more? And we have to be honest with them, right? So my guess is the answer is yes. And if you're talking about, an average household facing an increase of $1,700 over a 3-year period, phased in over a 3-year period, they can anticipate something moving forward. Under this proposal...
Can we comment on that real quick?
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, I would just say I don't know that that's necessarily true, because what's happened with salaries in particular and expenses, there's been a much higher increase the last few years than we've seen in years past. So I don't know that one contract necessarily means the next contract will be the same. And so I think we have to look at where we're at right now. I mean, we always begin our contract negotiations by looking at what the market is and what other districts are paying. And there's years that we are already in line and we can, offer lower cost of living adjustments, and the years that we have to make adjustments because we're falling behind. So I think a lot depends on what happens in the overall economy in the next couple of years before we can say this. What we're trying to look at is through the contracts we already know that we have over the next few years and the expenses we have right now. I'm not saying it's not a possibility, but I don't know that it's a guaranteed certainty. And, we could spread out just the operational budgets for more years, but we thought it was very important to put the capital projects in there as well. So.
And then again, I understand that too in relation to the contract negotiations and cost of living increases. Obviously, the last couple of years have been substantial in relation to the need to make the market adjustments in order to retain and attract good candidates to live and work, and or not even so much live in the community because they can't even afford that, which is why we need more firefighters. However, I had, and again, I was a public employee for a lot of years, and I think in a 40-year career, I think there was only 2 years where we took a 0. So there's always some sort of a cost of living increase that the employer, which happens to be the taxpayers of the town of North Reading, can anticipate. There's going to be an increase to the salaries, which is 80+% of our budgets.
Correct.
But that being said, I think it's important that we inform the public that while they may not be as dramatic, these increases going forward, the ability to live within the confines of Proposition 2.5 and sustain level services, never mind enhancement of services, is insurmountable. You can't do it. You can't operate within the confines of Proposition 2.5 anymore and sustain what we currently enjoy. So, that being said, it's difficult, and the number is big, $10 million, but it really doesn't cover us for a long period of time. So my first comment, I guess, is if we're going to include debt service in the override, what is to ensure that future boards, committees, and commissions and town meetings, but particularly boards and committees here, will not, as some of the debt service rolls off, roll it into the cost of general operating expenses? I think there's been a general concern that, when you do an override for a new school, at least it's going to drop off when the school is paid for. If we're going to include those costs in an override right now, and as those debt service drop off, how do we know, how can we be assured that it's not going to be rolled into covering, salaries and things like that nature, rather than debt service? And I think that's some of the questions that are going to be in people's minds. I may have an answer to that, but
just to speak to the debt service, I mean, we saw the list of items that we're looking at this year. Obviously, we can't come anywhere near the $16 million in items that are on there within the budget. Normally, we will do maybe $3 million in bondable items in a year. We also, the Capital Improvements Planning Committee agreed with the Board of Selectmen when we were formed 10 or so years ago to limit the amount of debt service that we're going to recommend. And currently that limit is $1.35 million, that we're not going to recommend anything above that in the year. If we absolutely need to do something, we have a stabilization fund, and we use that fund to stabilize the debt service by transferring money out of the debt service stabilization fund into the operating fund so that we hold at the agreed upon annual debt service. And we project it out for a good 5 years. Of course, the closer you are to it, the more reliable it is. But we do look at items that are out there. So I don't think that without the approval of the select board, we could not go beyond the level of debt service that's been given to us to recommend up to. Again, I use the word recommend because all we're doing is recommending to the select board, and then the select board decides to put it on the warrant, and then, of course, the voters at town meeting are the ones that make the ultimate decision. No decisions are made prior to town meeting, just recommendations.
Also, Mr. Earlier, I'll add to that because at the meeting we talked about, it seems to me that when we all leave this room, we might get a text from Michael Berto tomorrow morning that something else happened that requires $3 million. So when it comes, FYI, board members, every time it starts like that, it's never good. You don't want to read the rest of the text. But it seems that it would be highly unusual that there are not other projects, to your point, that would not need to be funded, and maybe that would take care of a little bit of do we have to keep going back to the taxpayer? Because it seems just from what we have here to fund, I think that's already out a while, but I would find it difficult to believe that $16 million number it's already up, we just don't know it yet. Just like the Chestnut Street Bridge, we thought we had 3 years or something, and then all of a sudden we had, a day and a half at our board meeting to decide to fund it. So I'll just add that I felt like.
And we thought we had 3 years, and they said, no, you have to shut it down today, and it's going to take 3 years.
And that's the point that I feel like that's not the first time, it's not the last thing that's going to happen. So I feel like that once we're done funding X, that, like you said, it doesn't fall off, but it's going to be attached to one of the many existing or future unforeseen needs.
And Jen, as far as the proposed budget with the override, does it generate free cash? Or are we gobbling it up and spending it as we go?
Lauren, would you speak to that based on the numbers?
It's very conservative in all of our estimates, both trying to place things out for 3 years. It's still going to be tight. It's going to be very tight. Especially the town side, with the allocation is going to have to make choices in the third year.
No, I know. What we've done in the past, to what Mr. Gilberto pointed out, is we did a very good job of conservatively estimating our costs, which generated some free cash, which allowed us the ability to balance the budget in an upcoming fiscal year. So I guess if this proposal doesn't do that for us, then the number's too low, because we will definitely be going back to the taxpayers sooner rather than later if you're not allowing yourself the opportunity to generate some free cash by putting together some conservative estimates of your costs. And again, 10 million is a big number over a 3-year period. So is 12. So I guess, how do you handle your own finances at times? How do you cut back in order to pay your bills, right? But what we have here is an inability to raise revenue to sustain the level of services that we currently enjoy. And there is a direct correlation between the quality of your school system and your property values. And if we allow that to suffer, along with the other services that we provide here, we won't look as attractive as we do today. And many of the people who moved here recently probably would be looking at some other place to live. And we have these other capital projects that will be proposed or that we're talking about, probably would be delayed now. But some of those provide us with an opportunity to generate additional revenue to help offset these costs. It's not a direct offset, but it's an ability to generate revenues to help share in the costs to move forward. If we don't do that, then it's just all of us here in this room and in this community today are the ones who are going to bear the entire cost for moving forward. So we have some big decisions to make here. But the first and most important one is, do we want to maintain the quality of our school systems, the quality of our public services that we currently have now, and we know exactly what the cost of those are. I think we as leaders of the community, we need to remind people sometimes too that we're also taxpayers in the community. And we're volunteers and we don't get paid, so when I've been told that, we pay your salary, I say, good, I wish you would double it for me. We're all in the same boat here. So it's just a question of, we as leaders of the community, do we want to put forth this proposal? And we need to be honest with everybody as to what it is. It's very finite, but it's important for us to maintain the quality of life, the value that our community currently holds. In order to maintain that, we have to invest in it. So Prop 2.5 doesn't allow us to do that. Only the voters can allow us to override that and maintain what we have. And collectively, we have to decide whether we're going to move forward in that fashion in something other than just give it to the voters and let them decide, give them some choices. It's more than choices. They put us here for a reason, and we're here for a reason. We've agreed to put in the time and the effort and the energy to learn the nuances of municipal finances and how to operate these departments and school department. So it's incumbent upon us to give a strong, clear message to the community as to why this is important and what the consequences are if we don't. And sure, they always have a choice. Town meeting, every year, town meeting has a choice to either fund it or not, and they've been extremely supportive of all these committees. You know, the school committee, the select board, finance committee, capital planning, improvement planning committee, they've been very supportive, whereas it's like unanimity when they pass our budgets. It's going to be a little different this year. So I think it's important that they get a clear message from us, if we can come to some conclusions. And again, there'll be differences of opinion, as there usually are, but we need to give a strong message that here are the consequences of what we do and what we don't do. And I think it's incumbent upon us to give them a clear message, and have them a clear understanding as to what the consequences are, and looking beyond 3 years. You know, I'm a little bit surprised that we couldn't go a little further out, but again, the number's just going to be larger. And again, maybe that's what we should be discussing. Should we be looking at a 5-year plan as opposed to a 3-year plan? Again, the number's going to be bigger, but to Mr. Buckley's point, the cost of personnel may not be as great in years 3 and 4 or 5 as they are in 1, 2, and 3 right now. So if we can factor that in, maybe people would be more comfortable in looking at a 5-year plan, so we're not going back with them and everything else, because the only thing we're going to be going to them for in the future beyond 5 years or within the 5 years is for some of these specific projects that need to be addressed also. So
the only other...
To your point, Mr. O'Leary, that is really the purpose of this, to get your feedback, to hear your ideas. Is that number a good number? Should it be bigger? Should it be smaller? That's what this is all about, so I appreciate that
but
feedback.
collectively have to come to a conclusion as to what are we really going to be offering people. A 3-year plan at a staggering number at $1,700 for an average household is a lot. Is $2,000 over a 5-year plan that much more? When we say, our initial costs for the first 3 years are a little higher than they are in years 4 and 5. So this is why we're looking at 4 and 5, so we don't have to come back. And if we have those types of projections, I think that's important. If we don't have them, we should look at it a little bit further out and try and anticipate.
So we were looking at 3, thinking, so we didn't have to go back in 1 or 2, but you're going a little further.
Well, no, I'm just, again, I concur with Scott over here that the cost of our negotiated contracts, which is 80% of our costs here to operate the town, is substantially more in this current 3-year time period than it will be in years 4 and 5. The increases, I believe, will be less. So.
And if I can just add one more thought on this, though. For the last few years, we've been covering things up as best we can. We've been funding retirements by
covering them up.
We've been
like that's
covering,
a lot of confidence.
We've been covering over deficits by using free cash to pay for retirements or pay for things that we're trying to get into the budget now, so that it's not just that next year is so much harder than the last few years. The last few years have been very, very difficult, and so we're trying to adjust it back to a better situation. And even when you talk about capital projects, we have PTOs paying for repairs to water fountains in schools because we don't have money in the budgets to do that. We're trying to adjust back and put things into the budget where they belong, so that we can use the annual operating budgets to pay for everything and not have to hope that there was money left over from last year to pay for this one-time expense that we know things are going to come up every year, And so for the last couple of years at town meeting, we've tried to express that we've pulled it together, but interest rates are higher right now than they've been in years past. So we've been able to use some revenue that might not be here in a couple of years if interest rates go down. There's lots of tools like that we've been able to use. So my point on an override is, we could have asked for a smaller override last year or the year before. We're trying to do it in 1 year to make up some of the challenges from the last few years and project going forward and hopefully get into a more stable position that maybe in 3 years we don't need more. Maybe things have leveled out a little bit and we have a good system going forward. And we talked a lot about 5 years, 1 year, 3 years. A lot of this is a compromise. I mean, just to be clear, I mean, we've been meeting for 2 to 3 hours every single week for about 2.5 months right now. We're meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. again for another 2 to 3 hours. And so there's been a lot of compromise trying to get to here, finding a position that we thought was supportable. And, it's good to hear what everybody else wants, but like we've had people that wanted to say, no, we definitely have to go with a bigger number for 5 years. We've had people that said, let's just worry about this year and do 1 year. And this is sort of something that I think everybody up here has gotten behind as a good sort of middle of the row position. So
Yeah, don't take my comments as being critical or even constructively critical. Again, I've sat there before, and I appreciate the effort that's being put in and that will continue to be put into it. But it's, and again, we haven't covered everything. I think we have to be careful with our terminology these days.
Yes,
because, maybe we masked them a little bit, but we also factored it in. When we have the free cash here, we knew what we were going to be using it for, as well as some unforeseen costs and expenses that occur. And to an earlier comment that was made by the town administrator in relation to our bond rating, we still need to generate savings.
Yeah.
We still need to be able to generate some savings to show that we're able to meet our unforeseen needs and fund certain things that were unexpected. So that goes back to the genesis of my other question. Is this proposal generating any free cash? And the short answer was sort of no, not really. That's of concern because the cost for borrowing for this community is going to increase if our bond rating slips.
Right.
They like to see that you plan ahead, you cover your costs, you anticipate well, and you're also putting a little bit in the bank just in case. And that needs to be factored in. But again, I'm not being critical or even constructively critical. I'm just...
No, I'd like to talk more about the free cash tomorrow at finance planning as well, because I thought we were generating free cash for this too. So I think we should talk a little bit more about that.
I think Gloria said that she was doing it conservatively, but it's still going to be extremely tight. So
can I follow up too on one of Steve's questions too, if you're done? Rolling the debt, rolling the portion of it that would normally be a separate debt exclusion vote into this. I mean, what was the basis for doing that? I know Vincenzo said because there'll be other capital projects to come up, and I think I'm not a mathematician, but I would think that by this fixed amount that then the 2.5 is based on, there should be some buffer there, I guess you could say, to make sure that we generate free cash in the end. There should be some buffer there. We shouldn't, we know based on the projections and all of the percentage, the historical percentages that are factored in here, that's the data that you used. It's not going to hopefully double or triple in the next 5 years. So I think we could use the data that they've used based on looking back, but what would be why and how is this done in terms of just a vote itself, or should it be separated out? And we already used, Mr. Gilberto mentioned the debt exclusion vote on this building itself. When is that coming off the books, and does that reduce people's tax bill once it comes off the books? So would it be better to separate these two out? What was the committee's purpose in bunching them together?
Mr. Gilberto.
I'll speak to the first
like
part.
7 in 1, but
I took 2 out of it, so I'll take the first of the 2. The first, I think, was I think we wanted to present to the town a complete package that we felt addressed the needs as we see them today over the next few fiscal years with a single vote, rather than to have things that might be competing against each other that I think in our estimation were of equal importance. The operating issues are of significant concern for us in the future fiscal years. so are the capital projects that we know we cannot absorb through our current capital funding process. So I think the thinking was, and again, it does not need to be the approach that we take. We have the ability to determine how to structure this. But I think our thinking was presenting to the bodies that are here, one solution over for multiple years with one vote that would be required. To the second question with regard to, I think, about this building and the expiration. So that was a 25-year bonding that began in 2013, I think. So we looked at 2037, 2038, 2037 for the expiration of the debt services. So it's a ways away that we're talking about. It was bonded for 25 years. We are in a not to get into the weeds, but we're in a closeout process with the state to get our final reimbursement from them. That's going to result in some, a reset of how much is left to be borrowed, and we have to figure some of the borrowing out. But in general, 2037 is the answer.
Can I just ask one last
Mr. Wallner?
Concerning the bond rating changing, does it affect our current debt interest rate, or is it for anything new?
No, it would only be for anything new.
Okay.
Or refi.
Right.
Or refinance.
Or refi.
And the other things that's been raised to me over the years in relation to school department thing is, we hear about, we have an influx, large, student population coming in, new kindergartens and all the rest. Well, what's happening with the rest of it? I mean, over the years, there's been all sorts of gaps and peaks and valleys. And, well, can't we just shift personnel from here to there? And I know you do that at times, but there are certain specialties that you can't do that for. So what's they're going to want to know what's the current school population at each level here, and then what's projected. When I graduated years ago, there were 208 kids in my class. One of my nieces graduated a few years after me. There were 98. And now there's 140. Where are we at? And again, someone asked earlier, what's the cost per pupil cost and that sort of a thing? And where are we comparatively with other communities and how we get rated? You just go on Zillow and look at those. You're looking at homes and you're looking at the cost of things, and you look at the school system, you look at the ratings, and we need to be concerned about how we're rated. Anyway.
And those are all part of it. Obviously, the lower class sizes, even comparable to other districts, might make a family move here versus going somewhere else, right? Which then increases the value of the homes in the town, right? But the process that you're describing is exactly what we do every year internally. So we start this process back in November. We look at things like enrollment. We look at, Michael does a wonderful job. He actually does 10-year enrollment projections. We present that to the committee. We discuss that with internally. So right now, the secondary numbers are down a little bit. The last few years, they were up. We added positions 5, 6, 7 years ago. We've now been moving some of those positions down. So we've done a lot of that to try to account. As you mentioned, sometimes it's very difficult with licensure and with professional status. There's all kinds of things like bumping rights, and people can only go certain places, so we have to make all those adjustments. Sometimes we do it through attrition, not replacing someone who retires. But last year we saw more of that as sort of at the high school. We're looking at the middle school a little bit more this year to try to balance that out, to try to get to some of the positions. And there's, we haven't, as Mr. Buckley said, we've been sort of piecing it together to make it work. We haven't replaced all these positions. We haven't replaced actual level services. We've gone down, we've made cuts every year, and we've made it work. And we've sort of, part of the issue is that we try to make it as painless on the students and families as possible. I think sometimes it's more behind the scenes things that you might not see, people taking on new responsibilities or picking up and doing other things. And so that's really the process that we've done. And so when we got to the point with this year, especially with some of those drivers, with all of the positions that we've needed for many, many years that were funded with ESSER funds, school adjustment counselors, digital learning technicians, none of those needs went away after the pandemic ended, right? And they were there before, and they're only heightened now. Anxiety for students, all those things that are needed that those positions require. So we've done all that work to be adjusting that, and we're still finding that there's a shortfall. So, but I agree, similar to the class sizes and ratios, we've got all that. Michael has probably the most comprehensive budget book that's out there, and very easily he's flipping here to like, here's the enrollment slide, here's this, but we can share that out. That'll be a part of everything that's communicated out, because those are going to be frequently asked questions,
Yeah,
for sure. Absolutely.
Thank you.
I know the select board's just getting going at 9
Yeah,
o'clock.
just one second. This is why
Hey,
this is
time
why
out.
we're here till midnight.
You've done 20 minutes
We've done a
of
lot
that
of the talking.
So-
I'm going to give my last shot to Mr. Studo, and then we're going to pass it.
So I don't have any questions, but I just got back from Disney, so I've been staring down budget deficits for a week. So, but what I can say is this, that the town has grown, and anyone who has multiple children, or more than multiple, knows that as you have more and you add, there's two ways to keep that standard of living. Okay? Either increase income, or there's only so far you can go with hand-me-downs. And eventually, you're going to have to lower that standard of living. And that's the best analogy I can give, because everyone knows that, well, anyone with children, for this analogy, which is a very, very large percentage in North Reading, understands that when you go from 0 to 1, or when you go from 1 to 4, that's what you're seeing. And that's what we're talking about here. It's pretty, so if you want the town to be able to offer to you, whether it is you're a veteran or someone more elderly or a parent, if you want that same level of service going into next year, this is what it's going to take. It's break it down simple, like I do for clients with financial planning. That's pretty simple. If you are willing to have a lower standard of living and then not complain about it, which highly doubtful, then we don't increase it and we live with it, right? Just like we've all probably done at some point personally, where it's like, you know what? We're going to give up this convenience because we don't have the money to do it. But you can't have it both ways. So that's what we're talking about. So if you, and nothing up here is a convenience, by the way.
Right.
Everything that's up here there's nothing convenient. It's not like, somebody cleaning up a cafeteria to keep it sanitary is like this luxury item. Okay, or on the municipal side, having extra firefighters because, well, let's just say that when there's multiple calls in town, there's five alarm fires to Peabody and Middleton and Wilmington. So just another thing to mention. So that's what I would say, that it's going to be pretty simple, that to keep the standard of living the same, this is what it's going to take. If we are okay with lowering the standard of living, then we just don't pay for it. And then we will, though, have to live with those consequences, which I think we're going to point out. And when you include capital, it's not just a school problem, it's an everybody problem across the board. There's not one demographic that's not going to get hit by this, not one. So anyone that thinks, because I see it online for both sides. I see, well, why do we need an extra 4 firefighters? I say because the population's, growing. While, the schools are just going to have to, make do. But you know what? That last $100,000 in equity you rose is because somebody came in and spent a lot more money than you probably did 30 years ago. And again, I'm just saying that correlation Mr. O'Leary discussed, that is almost a 1-to-1. It is one of the deepest correlations. I can tell you, if North Reading school system was not North Reading and some of the not so far neighboring communities, you can wipe 20-25% off your home value. But again, that just, you don't have to do much. That you can see from Zillow for the same house. And you don't have to go too far. It's about 5-6 miles, either east, west, or north or south. And you'll see what property values are with school districts that don't meet here. And then even municipal, we have great. I mean, Mr. Gilberto brought up something that we don't even have our own, the tree crew, but things get done pretty quick. I was heading to a board meeting last Monday, and around the bend, someone got in an accident, and a very huge pole was about to take out me and a few others, but it was hanging like this. But by the time I drove home, it seemed like RMLD had taken over, but DPW was there first. And this wasn't a tree crew. This is just our regular DPW department. So just something to say, that when it's why we need something. So that's what it comes down to. Do we want to keep our standard of living, or do we want to drop it? But that's, I think, just simplify it. I don't think it's that complicated.
Well said. I believe it's the TA who said, we have one bag of money. Was that you? We have one bag of money. You know, it's just like you're home, you know. You have what you have, and our expenses go up. It's no different. And we have to figure out how to pay those bills. So I am going to pass it on.
You get to talk now.
To Chair Buckley.
Well, I'll just point out that we talked for about 2 hours on this on Monday night, so we might not have quite as many questions, but Jeff, Noel, any questions, comments? Jeff?
One quick one.
You want to give him a microphone, Steve? No. Sorry.
And I don't think we're going to have an answer here, but do we have, I think it's on slide 27, so a couple back. Yeah. Assuming we do the 10 million, obviously it wouldn't look like that. Do we have a revision as to what that would look? Because I assume there's still going to be a gap out into the future.
That's a great question. We should
So it'd be good to see the sort of X to Y of like what that would be.
That's a great visual.
Sorry, I know that's more work. I just
Answer no, but it's a good idea.
Sorry.
Maybe.
I told him today I don't ever want to see that graph, ever.
And then here I am adding another one.
Column onto it.
Yeah.
Just add one more column on there, a blue one.
Because, I mean, it does two things. It shows what it is that obviously we're doing, but it also, when you project out into the future, it also shows that we're not really fully solving this. Which is the point we've been making of saying, hey, we know we've got other things out in the future. So, sorry, again, sorry.
Is that all, Jeff? Or?
Just using those percentages up there. You know,
Yeah.
right. Could fluctuate.
And can you do that as a triangle graph? No, that was it.
Okay. Noel, any comments?
I just think my comment overall is, sorry, thank you. A lot of questions have been answered, but as I also approach this from the perspective of someone who's not on a board, as I know people will ask these questions, which are like, so we're asking for this override, which is only going to get us through these 3 years. I know, because I've already been asked, what else are we going to be asking? Like, there's a lot of other big capital improvement type projects that we're asking for. So, is that going to be very clear to people when we're asking for this override? Like, we're asking for this, but oh yeah, next year we're going to ask for this, and next year we're going to ask for this. Like, just to have a little bit of forecasting for what we're going to be asking the taxpayers for in addition to this.
Sure, it's something that we really struggled with, and it may not seem that way in the number that came out of our conversations at $10 million, but we were we sort of stopped looking out into future years when we got to that number, because we know we have these other projects that are out there. Unfortunately, when you look at that graphic, there is no number that we can plug in there that will solve that gap for, in perpetuity. Because we know, we go back to that slide, our expenses outpace our revenues. And as the superintendent, so I think succinctly stated, we do things, we make adjustments each year in order to make sure that the budget is balanced and we're able to survive until the next year. There's a number of projects that we're concerned about. The fire station project is one, for which we have significant time and effort invested already in developing and closing in on a final design for. So, we want folks to be aware that that is on the horizon at a town meeting very soon. In fact, I think that the discussion has been about, as soon as this June town meeting, I think the discussion about an operating override is complicating that, because now we have a couple of things that are coming up and we have some other factors to consider, but it will be very soon for that fire station project. The wastewater project has been an ongoing review that's happened. We just got some additional information last Monday night that the community is spending time digesting, that I know the elected officials are taking time to digest as well. And then, the multiple municipal facility projects that we have out there. The community center, I mean, there have to be 8 different constituencies that are advocating for and looking at a design for a building. Excuse me. The town hall itself. The school buildings, I mean, we're fortunate that we're in a bit of a lull in terms of a need for a major building reconstruction project, but that's only a matter of time too. We know that the buildings, over time eventually will be reconstructed. West Side Fire Station, it's been a conversation 30 years, probably 20 years maybe. That's also something that we're much. There's a lot of work to be done on that project. We want folks to know these are out here. And, the great thing about our form of government is it's our choice. We can decide at town meeting, we can decide at the ballot which of these projects get funded. This group, presents the alternatives. This group is trying to, do that forecasting and say that these are projects that are on the horizon. But, I think our urgent concern is the operating budget and what will happen on July 1st. And so that's what we sort of prioritize.
If I can just add, tonight, we haven't fully discussed this, but our intention with the webinar that would be upcoming, and, I think people can also tune in and watch tonight. It will be recorded. They can watch this as well. We would reiterate a lot of these important points that are in these slides, maybe in a slightly different version, just, for the audience, right? With the, this was for the boards. We'll have it for community. We're going to do something in the morning, something in the evening. We're going to have multiple opportunities to reiterate these points because I think they're very important ones for people to see and understand, and we're going to give them opportunities. They will be recorded so that if they're not able to attend live, they'll be able to watch the recordings and ask us questions, and we're available to try to answer questions that are out there, because I think it's really important and will come up. So.
Thank you.
Mr. McGowan, any thoughts?
Not really. I think one of the terms that's always in my head when we're talking about every year adjusting the school, moving moving positions, adjusting to enrollment, we're always looking to right-size the department, right? Whether it's good news or bad news, it's always about right-sizing and getting things right for that particular year, and it's always changing, which is, I think kind of unique to the school budget process and planning process, where your needs are and where the clients are, if you will, the students, it's constantly changing. So that kind of process is something that is done every year, and it's always about finding that right mix. So I think it's important for the community to understand that. It's not something you have to do that to get the budget right every year. But I think in general about this process is that it is our responsibility as leaders of these committees, to do our best to present a plan that helps put the finances of the town, in better order or in good order, so that people can know what to expect in terms of services, in terms of school services, and can be sure that they can rely on the base levels of services that we provide, and this is the way we're going to do it. So I think this is a good process. I'm really glad we're all in this meeting. So, but I've also heard this stuff from the school so many times I don't need to ask any questions.
So I have a few quick comments for here. The first one, I just want to express my gratitude for everybody that's sitting up here, and in particular, Michael, Lori, and Patrick, and Mike Connolly. They had done a lot of work on this to try to figure out, it's hard enough to figure out a budget for 1 year, to try to ask them to go out 3 years, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. There's been a lot of work done by them, and so I just want to thank them. And for everybody, I mean, everybody tries to put the best interest of North Reading before the best interest of the school or municipal or whomever, and it's been a good working group to try to work through this and at least present something for the public. The overall problem is, by saying your revenue goes up 2.5%, that has nothing to do with any other variable that's out there. Inflation, wages, anything else. And that's the challenge. I would love to be able to say this fixes it for 20 years or 5 years or 10 years. I just think looking beyond about 3 years gets so murky that there's so many variables that it's hard. And it's hard to ask somebody to pay a lot for an override if the numbers at the end are not very solid. And so that's where I sort of come from. The only other thought that I want to just point out here, specifically about the school budget here. So a lot of the cuts that would be made within that 15.2, they scare me quite a bit, because the easy things to cut are things that are possibly going to cost us a lot more money in the future. So having larger class sizes means you're going to start having more students fall behind, which means you're going to have more students need additional services. Cutting interventionists that are specifically aimed to trying to find learning gaps at the youngest ages so that you can fix and address those issues early on helps later on, because educating in special education costs are very expensive. And so a lot of what we're doing, a lot of the cuts that we're going to have to make would be things that in the short term might help us balance a budget for a couple of years, but it's going to make the problem even greater in the future, because we are directly impacting the education, and we're going to see it in a few years. And a lot has gone into trying to address issues early on and having fewer students go out of district. And for many years, we've seen a decline in students going out of district and being able to educate them within our district. And that's my concern, is if we go backwards, class sizes get a little bit bigger, but some of these positions it'll cost us more in the future. And so it's just my fear here. We want to present it for the public to decide. I wholeheartedly agree with passing this override and trying to address the problem, and I hope other people do that as well. So I will pass the baton to Mrs. Hurlbert for the Finance Committee.
It's pretty hard to follow all these eloquent people. Two things that come to mind. One of them addresses free cash, and to a degree, Mr. O'Leary suggested some of this, and that is that in order to maintain our bond rating and our ability to borrow at some reasonable interest rate, Moody's recommends that you generate at least 3 to 5% free cash per annum. And the free cash is an indication that you've planned well and that you are able to survive if emergencies come up and this and that. And so the idea of budgeting so close to the line that you no longer generate any appreciable free cash is irresponsible as far as I'm concerned. And the other problem is that free cash is not particularly dependable. You don't know this year if you're going to have the same amount that you had last year. And because the way the snow and ice deficit is set up, you don't know if you're going to have a $500,000 deficit or a $350,000 deficit. And so, free cash is not something we should play around with. We need it for a variety of reasons. And as I'm sure all of you are aware, it is never used for reoccurring expenses such as salaries, among other things, because you don't know what you're going to have next year. Okay, so switch subjects. I've served on this committee in various iterations for probably 20 years, going back to when we used to meet in Dr. Troden's office at the old high school. And it really has worked very well. And it's proven to be a learning experience for all of us to hear what one another thinks and what we bring to the table. And I think we've all had an interesting journey with the financial planning team, as it's now called. So thank you for allowing me to have your banana bread and to meet and work with you people over the years.
Finance Committee have any questions?
I've got a few. Not as long as Kate, but. Can you go to the projections, Michael, the revenue versus expense? And while you're pulling that up, can you, the 15.2 on the balance budget side, I'm assuming, does that include the 4 FTEs that were funded by ESSER? Are those included in the 15.2? So it's not 19.2, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. All right, so I guess on this chart here, Lorianne, on the 245 in the municipal side, where we're showing the balanced budget, what are some of the high nails in that 245 that's not just, salary increases? And were there anything in the municipal budget, like I know the elder services asked for more? What are there any high nails in that 245 when we consider it like a level service?
I'm trying to think. I know there was quite a bit in DPW for like building maintenance and general expenses for contractual services. Drawing a blank.
The 1 day a week.
Oh, there was 1 day a week for elder services because they're currently
for
doing
Aldersgate,
that now. Mostly it was like contractual increases even for salaries.
Okay, so I think a concern I have when we're looking at this is to be consistent with the school side. The school is saying they need 1.2 to maintain level services, inclusive of maintaining classroom size and everything there. And I think what the municipal side is also saying is, in order to do the same thing considering the town population, the number is really 586, which is inclusive of the fire department, because that's an apples to apples comparison, right? So I think the 245 might be a little misleading. And then ironically enough, it's 2/3 school, 1/3 municipal. So I think when we're presenting this, when we get to the public hearing, we should probably be showing it at the 586. If on the municipal side, we all agree that the fire should go up to be consistent with our population, right? And then, so then that leads the following question. So then what on the municipal side is equivalent to the 1.5 for the schools, right? There's that litany of things that we saw on the chart. And I'm not sure, so what would be in that next level? The schools kind of indicated we would have free kindergarten. We would add the 1.6 heads and there, the other things which they presented on Monday night. I think it would be good for people in town to understand what's that next level. Is it the tree? We've mentioned the tree maintenance crew a few times. Is that the highest on the list? To give people the concept of where we stand, because I think my concern, that's number one. And then when you go to the next step, which is the override, to what level do we want to fund either the modified level services or the level services, right? And if it's level services, it's 2.1. We'll eat into that quickly, into the $10 million, right? And that really means none of this is ever really going to be on the table, even with an override. Yeah. So I'm trying to tie all the numbers together from just seeing this, but
sure. So
it's clear that none of this could ever actually happen, even with an override on this current list.
I think when we look at the 3-year projection, again, I'll just reiterate, we sort of, when we were adding the numbers up, when we hit 10 million, we sort of stopped adding at that point and said, we've hit our cap. We need to come back to this forum, have a conversation about it. We have an aggregate of $1.5 million here. Some of that is things that are already funded that had to be cut. I don't think we expect to get through everything on this list. And in fairness to the select board, it has not prioritized things on this list, nor has it been asked to at this point in time. But I think it's fair to say we won't get all of what's on that list. We may get some of what's, we may have to pick and choose, candidly, like we do every year for the budget. But without additional revenue, all of this ends up effectively off the table.
Okay, yeah, and so so if you looking at the projected revenue, that's where I think it would be good to show the 600K. That's apples to apples to the school, so people don't have the perception that it's weighted towards the schools versus municipal. And then I still think it would be good to see, all right, if the school say it's 1.5, which is whatever term you want to use, really it's towards the NRPS plan, right? What is the municipal plan that's equivalent to the school plan that we could present in that open hearing? Because I think people are going to ask, well, what would we pick? What are the top 3 things on this list that would get us to, 850K, 900K? Because I think that's going to be, that's the first question I'm going to ask before I vote for an override is, what do I get in the municipal? Here's what I get for the schools. What do I get on a municipal? Am I going to get tree cutters? Am I going to get, and I know that you may not know the exact answer, but it would be good to have a foundation.
Do you want to speak to that, Lee?
Well, we kind of do know that answer, because in the capital improvement, I was looking for Dawn. He stepped out. Yeah. In our capital improvement committee, we do rate those. We do. We all give a number of priority, and it gets averaged out. So we do have those in order.
Although that,
Not here, but
the
we
issue
do
might be
have
if we're,
that.
it all depends what you're trying to count as municipal, because if you count capital as capital.
I'm talking specifically to
Here.
the list right here.
You're
Right.
talking like here.
Yeah, because capital is a whole nother can of
okay.
worms, right?
This is what we've been trying to accomplish with.
Right.
Except
Right.
for the rental of auxiliaries.
Mm.
We've had this for our requested budget year after
Year after year,
Year
yeah.
after year after year.
Right.
We can't get to this, which seems to be some of this very basic, but we have to eliminate it to be able to balance, and we've had that exercise, I think.
So
at least
what you're
last
saying,
year.
Mr. Sutherland, is if on the school committee,
Right.
the kindergarten is the, I hate to say wish list, but
Goal.
the want. What is it here that maybe we'll go back to our meeting and say, okay, if we had to
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
potentially put something out there that we thought is important, that, I agree, I've been on for 4 years, and some of these, I think, for 4 years have
Yeah.
been skipped over, if I don't, probably longer, right? So, okay, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, maybe to put it succinctly, it's what's the equivalent to NRPS 2025 for the municipal side, right? What's that vision there? I think that would be very helpful going into a town meeting to say, this is what our vision is for the next 3 years alongside the school vision, because it was really easy to correlate the 1.5 for the schools to the NRPS 2025. It was easy to see line by line, okay, I see what you're trying to do here. It'd be good on the municipal side too, because I think we're really gonna have to demonstrate this a town-wide override problem. This isn't specifically capital or schools, or it's really all three components that are driving this. And then I guess one other one, if I have time for one more. Do we know on the, can you go to the $10 million slide? Sorry. Where's the rest of the funding for the actual, are the bridges still going to be considered under a debt exclusion?
So in this scenario, they would not be. They would be part of a single vote, $10 million, phased in over 3 years override.
Where are they in here? Is that-
So they're on the third line down, Chestnut. It says Park, but Park is a different issue because we've already got funding for it. It's actually Chestnut and Burrows that will be funded there. And then you see the fire department's ladder truck right under it.
Debt service is funded there.
Yeah, so it's not the
So
total.
where's the balance of the cost? It's not, it's only 700,000 for the two bridges?
That's the annual debt service
Annual
over,
debt service,
yeah,
okay, and then for over the 30 years, okay.
yeah.
Sure, okay.
For Park Street, we did, yes. For Parks.
And so the last one related to this then, I know we're doing the bridge study. Do we have a concept of the remaining exposure for the remaining culverts? Or none of that, I saw.
Yeah, none of that is in
All
here.
the other things,
Yeah.
that's not even, so that's an
No,
unknown.
so that's not, we don't know that at this point. We have funding, we got a town meeting for a study, and we're evaluating it, and it's more culverts than
But
any of us could imagine.
I mean, so the Borough Street was kind of a new one.
So Burrows came up through whoever.
Yeah.
Burrows Street came up in the fall. We had received indications that the project might be able to be a straightforward replacement of existing culverts, which we were not able to do on Chestnut Street because of their size. We got information over the past couple of weeks from the state's engineers reviewing our plans to do just that, that they thought that they were going to be requiring us to investigate a much more substantial replacement of those 4 culverts with something that might be more in line with a bridge. So we're holding basically the same amount of cost as what we are projecting for Chestnut Street right now, which is $4 million. I think we're hopeful that it may come in at less than that, but we won't have an idea of that, before June 30th of this year.
Of the remaining culverts, have we started that analysis?
So we've contracted with a firm to do.
How far into that are we?
It's early in there.
But
a
Mr.
time.
Sudo's point, we kind of have this other capital that we don't
So
know
every-
that we
Yeah.
may find out more bad news in the coming weeks and months it's not accounted for here.
So I would say we sort of, we're trying to project out, so we put other future capital projects down there. That could be cash in any given year, that could be debt service, depending upon the need. But we're trying to do that, look ahead, to the extent that we can.
And it's something that has been brought up at capital and financial planning, and that's where, when Mr. O'Leary said that, you know, kind of woke me up from my Disney slumber, that that study is not going to produce anything good. So I can, you know, I just don't have the number, and that's why I think that the idea that there's not going to be somewhere for the debt service to go is just not, it's like a private school tuition that never ends. It's just going to always be there. And that's why, and again, that's just for the culvert. I mean, there's something else somewhere. I mean, you know, so again, yeah, but that's definitely been brought up a lot. It's just that we, kind of like most things, we can't get a.
I mean, it would seem like, to Mr. O'Leary's point, the $10 million is, I mean, we're talking razor thin for the 3 years. I mean, just trying to do the quick math. So it's going to be, it's probably the right number to start out with, to talk about, but it's definitely, looking at the budget side and the projected growth, it's going to be right on there.
One of the other things that I think the public will have a better understanding of too when we talk about this is that the municipal side has far less flexibility than the school side. You're basically a bottom line budget, and you can adjust far more quickly than on the municipal side. We're almost like line by line by line, we're appropriated, and we can't shift funds to meet unforeseen need very easily without having to go back to town meeting all the time to address the immediate need. So when you say, how maybe we should prioritize that list of things, sure, I can give you a list of how I would prioritize things, but, I'm more looking for free cash so that I can adjust the situation. I mean, should we have a grant writer? Sure, the grant writer is probably on paper itself.
Right.
And then some. And we haven't had that. It's been in the budget now and been cut for the last 5 years.
Can I ask?
This poor bugger over here, he gets evaluated every year by the members of the board, and he gets constructively criticized because he's stretched too thin, he doesn't have enough help in his office. That's not his fault. It's our inability to give him the resources that are needed to meet the needs of the community best. So it's going to be, it's already a struggle.
Right.
So as we're facing this, I mean, if we're really going to situate ourselves well and budget wisely, then we should get those resources in place and be willing to carry them forward. And we haven't been able to do that yet. So it doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to strive to do it, because we do. So it's.
Can I just ask a related question to the whole capital issue? Can you go to slide 36, please? The discussion about other sources of funds, and specifically the $15 million is from the J.T. Berry property. How does that discussion happen? Or how should we be incorporating, I'm asking if people have an opinion on how should we be incorporating that discussion into this whole discussion, especially since these funds are limited to capital improvements and debt service, where does that come into the discussion, or do we leave it out for now and add it in later?
Leave it out. It's like saying, what about the Hillview enterprise? Let's get money out of that to repurpose. It's for a limited specific.
Well, but it's not limited, it's limited to capital projects, right? But not limited, other than that, it's not limited.
But aren't we using the interest to pay down debt service?
That's an important.
That's one component of those funds. They're generating significant interest. They're generating significant interest that we've struggled with how to budget for, because we know it's not going to last forever. Right. This year we upped the number significantly to with $750,000, I think, in interest. I mean, it's an extraordinary revenue stream for us to have.
Yeah.
I have an opinion, but it's more an opinion than anything else.
That's all we have at the moment.
I have been, I think on behalf of I'll say the select board, but not necessarily even this iteration of it, previous versions have, stated that, we've looked to that funding, that 15 million, to be funding as something that could support investment in economic development infrastructure. And so that sort of materialized in a discussion about, could it be used to help offset the cost of a potential wastewater project? But that's obviously a conversation we're in the midst of as a community. It certainly is a controversial conversation. But behind that are multiple other projects that would require funding from the taxpayer. And so, once we've concluded the discussion about wastewater, whatever direction it goes in, it's either there to help for that purpose or for these, what I will call major construction projects that, that we could reduce the impact on the taxpayer for if we were to utilize that funding.
Yeah.
The sort of obvious ones that jump out at you are the bridges, because they're so expensive. Should we be utilizing those funds for those bridges? And I'm certain that there is an argument, to do that, but I would also just say that, the costs are almost dwarfed by what we see on the screen here, unfortunately. So that's an opinion. And maybe I shouldn't have shared it, but that's my opinion.
Finance Committee? I think we're up to you still.
Just in relation to the voting funds, those are long-term, those are one-time money. I think the philosophy that evolved over time is they should be spent wisely and carefully, so that it has some long-term positive impact on the community moving forward. And if it's seed money for something, to get you to a certain point, you're going to have to get. That's what it's supposed to be there for. It shouldn't necessarily be there for general needs, upkeep of our infrastructure that we currently have. Or, to me, personally, I don't think we should be using that money for normal operating cost maintenance and upkeep.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair position for sure. And I think as long as interest rates are as high as they are, we ought to be reaping that income. I don't think it should be used this year. But, I think when I first joined the finance planning team, that money was generating, I forget, $50,000 in interest, and now it's generating many hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest. So we don't want to just blithely give that up but at some point the rates will be, at some point those rates will be back down and that income will be not as impactful. So anyway.
I think we had a question from finance over there.
Can we just confirm what our current free cash flow is at for this year? Is it around 4 million, or is it higher than that?
For 24?
Yeah.
The balance? The balance of free cash?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just over 3 million is the
Okay.
balance. It was certified at about 8.6.
Yep.
We have just over 3 million left, but it's been allocated, like for things for June town meeting.
Yep. Okay.
So yeah, it's substantially, at that point, probably below 400,000.
So it's a great point to bring up, because I think everyone is aware, or many people are aware of it. We had an extraordinary series of things that happened to generate our free cash as of June 30th, 2023, I guess it was, last year. One of which was we settled a multi-year lawsuit for over $2 million. So that money couldn't be budgeted. It came in, it had to become free cash. So right off the top, it's 2.6, I think, million it was. It comes right off that big number that you see. We had an extraordinary redemption of some tax title liens as well, that resulted in one-time money that came in that I think it's fair to say won't materialize at any point in future years. So we're already looking at, we had this artificial bump in free cash that we're managing, and we're putting the funds aside for the purposes that we'll need them for. I think we all feel pretty comfortable in saying that it's not going to be that big a number in a fiscal year using our current budget practices anytime soon. And in fact, we think it would be even lowered from the average that we've seen at say $3 or $4 million based on what we had to do to adjust in the budget here. So
was the opioid settlement in there too?
It was, yes, yeah. Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Scott. Do we? I feel like we were at it was like $84,000 for maybe 5 years, something like that. I mean, there is a revenue stream that's there. Again, it's finite, but there is a revenue stream that's there, and I think the idea of could it offset the youth substance abuse coordinator, it possibly could. We need to look to that. There are other needs that have been identified for the use of those funds as well that we're looking at, but that's something we can look further into.
Services stabilization.
I think Finance Committee is all set. Everyone? All right.
I'm good.
Do we want to take questions from the public?
Yeah. I think we, so it's
have some time.
9:48.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we have a few minutes if we wanted to do that.
All right, so we're going to open it up to the people in the room if you have any questions that you want to ask.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
there's a slight chance the lights might turn off at 10.
Oh.
So we have 5 minutes.
Get into that, but I think.
Any quick questions?
Can we get that in room 14?
We can.
Oh, that would be great. Oh, sure.
You wouldn't even get to the second item on your agenda.
Anybody in the audience that would like to ask a question?
Oh, wait, Janine Imbriano was calling me and she wasn't here before, so.
It's like the end of a faculty meeting, nobody wants to.
Get locked out. She probably got locked out.
All right. Oh, Mr. Wallner, yes.
Yes.
Who's Janine number?
Okay. Got locked.
Bless you.
They're locked out.
And I appreciate everyone who has come and engaged in this tonight.
Yep. Did you have a question, Kate?
And
Start off with
for
Joe.
all of you that came to listen,
Yeah.
it's a lot to take in.
I'll-
Yep. Back there. Yeah, you want to?
And how the impact that the people can watch that, and they can really voice the impact that it would have on
Right.
That's something for people.
Is that on NORCAM?
It's coming, we're going to share that out to the school side, and we can share it out on our website as well.
And can you just state your name and your address too?
Yeah, Kevin Mackey on Swan Pond Road. So I know we would sort of a little debate whether you should go out 3 years or 5 years. So, but it seems like the town of North Reading is limited in the income that they're going to generate based on the tax revenue. And so if the expenses go up for a couple years, we're in trouble. If the expenses come down, then we're in a better situation. But we don't really have any control over that, and we're sort of at the mercy of the economy, expenses that we really have no control over. And that's kind of my question, or that's what it seems to get from this conversations.
Yeah.
I think that's a good analysis. I think when you look at our projections here, again, that predictable revenue stream, which is not all of our revenue, increases 2.5% per year, plus new growth, which again, not necessarily predictable. We've done pretty well over a 20-year period of time. But when you look at what happens, our fixed costs, they're increasing at 5% per year. So those are things that, in general, we're handed a bill for. We don't necessarily have the ability to do much. So we want to control our health insurance costs. We've done some creative things here to try to control it. But the real control we have is we have less employees, which is now impacting services. You look at the cost to operate, that 3.3% for municipal, 4.1% for schools. Again, both numbers that are in excess of 2.5%. We've been able to make it for I'll say 20 years, going back to 2005, the last override, because we've benefited from new growth in the form of apartments and condominiums mostly that have taken place. But that's coming to conclusion. And when you couple that with inflation, which I know is not easy for folks to hear because they're dealing with it in their household, but we're dealing with it as well, in the municipal expenses. And that's also a big part of what's brought us here.
Also, stretch out even more than that, starting from the say probably about late 80s, if you look, inflation and rates have gone down like this. This is why when the Fed hiked in 2022, it was such a big impact, but just that's also allowed this experiment called Prop 2.5 to work, if you look at it.
100%.
If you if you have the yield curve the other way, Prop 2.5 would have failed after, 2.5 years. No pun intended. It would have never, it wouldn't have worked. So meaning California got lucky and we got lucky for copying it. Like, that's pretty much it if you look at it. But now, just in the last 3 is you finally get what happens though when you have it. Cumulative inflation is roughly about 20% over the last 3 years, and we've only been able to raise 7.5. So, I mean, it doesn't, I don't need to bust out a calculator for people to understand that.
Yep.
So, but again, I think historically people should know of like, well, how come what did we do right all these years? Well, in reality, we didn't.
We did a good job being conservative, but we also benefited probably more from that low inflation.
To your outside factor point, Mr. Mackey, that outside factor also made it easier for a while, for a long time, actually, decades. And now, again, I'm not saying we're going to have the last 3 years going forward, but I mean, am I going to?
It's going to be somewhere in the middle for a while anyway.
This is why Mr. O'Leary's commentary that the end is not in sight is real, because there's zero chance that cumulative, even if base rate inflation falls to 2.5, that doesn't mean our costs are going to fall to 2.5.
Especially because health insurance.
Correct.
So since we're having conversations about budget, is there anything, so I know there's always sort of one plan right now to raise some revenue. Is there anybody talking about how we can raise that, like, more revenue besides just the tax base?
Sure.
I'm not talking about it tonight.
Well, he said other than that.
Yeah, other than.
But that's the sort of reality. I mean, that's the only, that's whether it's a good plan or not plan, that's,
in financial,
there aren't that many other plans out there.
In financial planning, when we've talked about certain communities, and we don't want North Reading to get there, but communities that have had multiple overrides, like 3 in 10 years or 3 in 11, what ends up happening is then development gets turbocharged, because eventually everybody throws in the white towel. You can only pay so much till it's like, you know what, I don't care if Main Street looks like downtown Boston. I don't want another override. So I don't know where it is. We have it's a deeper discussion for that, the revenue side. It just, our topography is unique, which makes it hard enough. So I don't know. I mean, I think Mr. O'Leary's been thinking about this for 40 years, and he hasn't come up.
We heard from our expert consultant at our last meeting, Mr. Buckley was from our meeting too. And we have a split of 12% commercial and the rest is residential. And it was a question pointedly about at what point do you shift to a dual tax rate? Because people argue about shift to a dual tax rate. But all we would be doing if we did that is chasing out all of those 12% small businesses that we have here. And it's not fair right now. It's about a 37 shift is what he said. But he was very clear that sewer is vital to our economic development, period. Full stop. That's the end of the line. So that's the type of thing, too, that we really have to put out there and explain to people. We have the data, we have the analysis, we have the consultants, the town has paid for these consultants, the town meeting has approved these consultants to look at this. As tough as that is, that's another component. We aren't going to get revenue streams in unless we get some economic development. And if we don't do sewer, we have to have a plan B for that. We have to have these treatment plants, and we have to put our money where our mouth is there and pay for these probably treatment plants all over those corridors. Get the land and develop treatment plants, or do something to develop new growth. So we already have the data. We know what we need to do for those different types of revenue streams, starting with bringing business in, and then perhaps growing it to a level where we shift. People don't want the identity of the town to shift. A lot of people don't want the identity. So the whole town has to buy in on that. And it is a decision on what's our identity, where are we going to go in the future.
Either way, we have
make an investment in order to make enough money
Right.
to generate money. And when you do that, it's going to take it over. So.
Right.
additional
Right.
investment-
That one, full circle.
To reach that goal, whatever that goal is. Yeah, I can't talk about this. Additional revenue, and it's down the road. If you don't make the investment, that's a conscious decision that we can make, but at least they'll understand that there are consequences with all those decisions. And just be eyes wide open and say, okay, I'm satisfied with what we have, I'm satisfied that in order to move forward, you're gonna be talking to us every 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Just for general operating expenses, with nobody else to share in those costs.
Right.
You're okay with that? Okay. You know, okay. But it's not going to be, going to happen because our board here and boards and committees are not going to inform the public. We're going to give them the information that they need to make an informed decision. And whatever conclusions they come to, but they're going to be aware as to what needs to be invested in order to grow our tax base and what consequences are going to happen if we don't grow our tax base. Either way, the election has to be made, and it can't be done in the general operating expenses.
Yeah, please, could you get a microphone? Just state your name and your address. Thank you.
Katie Gabriello, 13 Damon Street. Couple of quick questions. I don't want to take us to the light go down, but it's 9:59, so if we plunge into darkness.
We have a 10:30.
Oh, good. I was like, I don't accept responsibility for that. Is this the first time that this number, the $10 million number, has been shown publicly?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I am concerned as to how the town's going to take this. I am all for this override based on what Mr. Studo was saying about our quality of our school experience here, our quality of our municipal services. I don't want to give that up. I have 3 small children, and the idea of my first grader in a class with 30 other first graders is terrifying. The teachers would get just eaten alive by that many. That's too many first graders for anyone. So that, I think, looking at the historical overrides that have brought to the town, what has passed, we've never seen a number this high. I know it's an apples to oranges comparison with inflation and with just the cost of goods going up, but I think this number is going to give people sticker shock in a big way, and that's what everyone's been saying about the educational piece and the data and just presenting what is at stake and what we could be losing is going to be super important, especially since we are 2 months from town meeting. It doesn't feel like very much time. I'm super encouraged seeing the board reaction. I'm hoping that there's a unified recommendation from this, from everyone at town meeting. I am not encouraged to see the max of 13 people here, not on a board or committee. Maureen Doherty from the transcript, of course, is here reporting on it to spread the good word, and we have NORCAM. But seeing this few people at such an important meeting is very concerning to me with town meeting coming up. So I know everyone here is aware of that and aware of the lack of public engagement and how we can all kind of, use the various channels and various methods and various spheres of influence that we all have to hopefully increase that awareness. So everyone is coming into this eyes wide open, able to make an informed vote. And then just, Mr. Gilberto, I think this is a question for you, the practicalities of this vote. So it goes to town meeting where it's a majority rule on that. And then it goes to a paper ballot, and is that the same? It's another simple majority, or?
Yeah, it's a majority vote. It would be an election held at St. Teresa's, presumably.
Okay. So there's a chance that this is something that could get voted yes at town meeting, and they get voted no in an actual election.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would it go to election if it gets voted down at town meeting? That doesn't put a stop to it?
First of all, the select board has to put it on the warrant.
The warrant, sure. Yep.
Then the select board to determine whether or not an override is going to be considered.
Yep.
Determine whether that's going to happen. The law allows for a ballot vote before town meeting, not necessarily town meeting before. You can do it either way.
Okay.
You can do it either way.
So it could get voted down at town meeting and then still go to a ballot?
It's up to the select board to determine whether or not we're going to put it on the warrant, and at the same time determine when a special election is going to take place. We lose the draw, or the select board can determine to set the date after town meeting takes action.
But
That hasn't been determined.
But the specific question is, if it's sequenced with town meeting and then the special election, if town meeting votes down the proposal, does the election happen or matter?
So I believe the election does have to happen once it's been called, and the timing.
Once it's been
The
called.
timing doesn't.
Would have to, would we consider calling the election, making that decision and scheduling it before we get to town meeting? I mean, the election
Mr.
is after,
Gilberto will
but.
answer that.
So I think we're going to have to,
Yeah.
because we have to
Can't
give the
have
town clerk 35 days notice. June 10th plus 35 gets us into July. It's too late.
Plus,
for
we have
us.
the local elections coming up on the 7th of May, and just a lot of yeah. So
And which is-
would there even be a point to voting at town meeting if it was, if it gets voted down, it doesn't seem to matter, if there's still going to be
You
an
could later
election?
vote at another town meeting.
I anticipate that town meeting vote would happen, and then there would be the ballot vote in an election at St. Teresa's. We have to look at the wording and what the law allows, but there is the possibility that could, be a valid vote, and that a town meeting at some point in time in the future could vote to appropriate that funding.
Okay.
Again, still takes 2 votes, 2 affirmative votes. The one thing I'll just clarify is this came up when we were talking about the wastewater project, not to bring that back up again. And there was a question about it. And in that scenario, we were talking about not scheduling the election until after the town meeting vote happened. That's not an alternative for us at this point in time because we don't have enough time after the June town meeting.
Okay.
I could just
Thank you.
attest, just, the timeline does seem very short. The Mass Association of School Committees put out a great webinar presentation training for school committee members. We are well within that timeline. This is why these are happening now. If you think about an election, you start getting a lot of stuff about ballot questions right before.
Sure.
The numbers of people that will start listening and paying attention, getting closer to June is huge. So that's why this meeting's in April. We're going to have the information sessions. It's going to snowball, and people are going to get a lot of information in the time they need it to get out and vote. So it seems condensed, and it is, but we're not it's not that we should have done this months ago. We're sort of
Sure.
on pace right now. We can't slow down, but we're still on pace.
Sure.
I think Mr. Mackey, and then I'll go to you, Mr. Mackey.
So in the case that it goes to town meeting and there's either it wins or it loses, and then there's also a paper ballot, is the paper ballot one just like a regular, like it's open 8 to 8?
Yeah, I mean, the select board would set the hours. There's a minimum under the state law. I think it might be 12 to 6 or something like that, but the select board would set those hours.
And do we know off the top of the head if more people show up to town meeting as opposed to more people going to vote? Because I would think that
Yeah, it doesn't
there'd be more people that would be able to go all day to vote as opposed to just in that specific 3-hour time frame of a town meeting.
I think you would find that more people would participate in an election than at town.
That's what I would think.
Right, that's what he's saying.
There'll be a
That's what
good
he's saying.
That's what I'm saying. So even though it,
Voting in the ballot box.
Yeah.
right, so you would think just, even though whichever way it goes, that there's a better than 50% chance it could go the other way in a town-wide election. Just as a hypothetical.
Or they could support whatever town meeting decided and greater numbers too.
Yeah.
It could go either way, but you're right, though, they're almost uncorrelated, right? The town meeting vote and the election vote could be completely uncorrelated, because you have a whole different population of people showing up at the election.
Yeah.
The
The fact remains that the town meeting vote and the ballot vote, if it's going to be mailed, both of them have to go there. In order
Right.
Yep.
to work.
So what happens if one wins and one loses? Is there a third?
Yeah. And I believe that's the election that's.
Right.
Mr. Wallner?
I'll grab this one. Yeah, just real quick. I agree with your sticker shock of $10 million. So let's think about that for a second. The average house is $10,000 property tax. It's going to go up by 250 anyways for 2.5, right? For the regular 2.5%.
Or more.
We're saying it's going to go up probably to 600. So let's kind of frame it year by year. It's going to total up to be 10 million, but if you hit them with a 10 million right out of the chute, it's sticker shock.
Yeah,
And
that
so
was
let's show.
for this group, right?
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, for this group it works, but when you're talking to the people, it's like they want to hear about it on their level.
Yeah.
And so if you show the normal 2.5% per year, but then you show what we're going to be adding on
Be a different
over
color.
3 years, yes.
Yeah, I
At
think
least
For the
it-
average household, for the average household, round
Yeah.
numbers, it's $1,800, you know? So
1,800?
Excuse me, excuse me, it's $150 a month.
And then as Mr. Sutherland said, it's, and what am I getting for that? I'm paying this, and here's what I
Right.
lose if I don't do it, here's what I get. That's
Right.
the ultimate decision.
That's
everyone's
really the
making.
ultimate decision.
It's pretty, right.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to spend more on anything, but it's, what am I getting, what's the
I
value?
agree. And
Keep
so
it-
what's that?
keep it simple.
What's that extra,
Yeah.
what's that extra amount? Not
the value?
600, because you're already going to get the 250.
Where's the hammer? 850.
Yeah.
Correct.
250 plus 600.
Right.
What are you talking about? It's if it's 10,000 average property tax, and you go up by 2.5%.
So it's going to go up 250 anyway, then you add this, it's going to go up another
But-
600. Your total's 850.
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, right, you're right, still, okay, I'm sorry.
Don't argue with
But all-
Lori
No, I'm
Ann.
sorry, no, hi, sorry, just wrong.
The greater
You get
point
the
is
idea.
all of that needs
You
to
get
be
the idea.
clear to the taxpayers, yeah.
You get the idea.
On an annual basis, not, or
Yes.
on each year as opposed to the whole amount. I
Yes,
think
sorry,
that's a really
sorry for my math is wrong, but the concept is right.
Was there anyone else?
All right.
That
Oop,
answers
We have to do
the
motion?
question, though.
Yeah.
What's that?
If one passes and the election doesn't, that's the end, and then we go to the.
We use the smaller, the budget on, based on
We go to the
current revenues.
consequences.
Conversely,
Mrs. Gabrielle,
but-
there'll be two different options, I think, that's what Michael said.
So that's correct. So,
For the water.
as I stated earlier, we have to have a budget on July 1st. So there'll be a budget that will get brought to town meeting and potentially approved, would have two lines for each department, including the schools, for fiscal year 2025. One would be within the limits of the current tax base, which is going to probably have, smaller number, lower numbers appropriated, lower dollar amounts. And then a second, which would be contingent on the voters approving an override. So if that contingency is met and that vote is taken and successful, then that would be the budget that's in effect. If it is not, then it would be the lower budget that would be in effect.
I think we have a question over here. You could state your name and your
yeah.
address.
Michelangelo Soparlis, 2 Cobblers Lane. I guess it's kind of a question, but also something I want to say. There's definitely a lot of focus on money, which is really good. Just to know where money is going in the town. But I guess maybe it would help to know if the money is used to meet up with a law or a code or something like that, because it's sometimes hard to see if money needs to be spent or not on some stuff.
Thank you. So there are a number of things that we're mandated to do in the budget. It's not everything that you see in there. Some of the mandates are, borrowing that we've done. So we've taken a loan to do a project, and we have to pay that loan back. So it's a different type of mandate that's out there. But there's a little bit of both in the budget, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. So.
We have a lot.
Contract obligations.
Yep.
There's a lot of.
Lights.
There's a lot of unfunded mandates for the schools.
Yeah, we haven't done that in a few years,
I
but
know.
we had what, 34-page list of
Yeah,
unfunded
there's-
mandates?
yeah.
Including student
Things that
opportunity
we're
act
just,
plan.
we're just required to spend money on.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody,
all for coming.
Thanks,
We
everybody.
have a motion. We're going to have to.
Shall we say it all at once?
So select board, motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have Mr. Minipelli, and I have a second from Mr. Studo. All in favor? Aye.
School committee?
I move that the school committee adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes 4-0.
Finance?
Finance Committee motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Thank you.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Planning committee motion to adjourn.
Have to be a
Second.
There we go.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.